This guy was treated like a pack mule. Nagi was a professional porter. His only skill? A magic bag that could store anything. But because of his class, he was constantly humiliated. Life wasn't easy. Nagi was rejected as an adventurer, all because his class was considered useless. They laughed at him. But what they didn't know was that inside that bag, Nagi could store everything. Food, weapons, skills. He even awakened a brutal legendary power, one that allowed a mere porter to clear dungeons alone and humiliate veteran adventurers. The world the protagonist lives in is overflowing with countless dungeons. It was a vast, dungeon world, along with countless treasures hidden deep inside them. Adventurers who conquer these dungeons claim the greatest wealth and fame in this world. However, not everyone can become an adventurer. Only the chosen few could grasp that title, and the protagonist walks through desolate lands, all alone with his large backpack. A guard looks at him with disdain, warning him that a dungeon lies ahead, and only those with permission can enter. He demands to know what's around his neck. It was shaped like a pouch. Nagi had become the adventurer's pouch. He was a white-tier porter. The guard complains while scratching his head, wondering how a porter could be later than the actual adventurers, and why was he alone, without other porters, since the association must have received the 50-coin advance. Nagi explains that he is the one and only exclusive porter costing 50 gold coins a day. The guard claps his hands together in disbelief, saying just one guy costs that entire amount. Then he yells, asking if Nagi thinks he looks like an idiot. This was a dungeon that should have at least 4 or 5 porters. He couldn't do anything alone, but if he has a mouth, he should answer, since he can't even carry his own luggage alone, let alone the dungeon loot. He questions if Nagi thinks he can adequately carry the burden of their lives. If he understood, he should go back to the Porter Association and ask for backup. Otherwise, they were going to turn the association upside down. Nagi comments that they have a lot of luggage for just 4 people, and the guard continues insisting he won't even be able to carry it. The young man reflects that reactions like this are pretty common, since he was a porter charging 5 times the standard rate. In these cases, instead of giving drawn-out explanations, it was more effective to just show them, taking his large backpack off his back. Nagi quickly loosens the rope, gently stuffing their backpacks inside. The adventurers gathered around the bonfire watch this happen. A blonde guy in the center says that must be some kind of magic backpack. 2 other adventurers ask where he got it, because it would be way better if they had one. Nagi apologizes, saying it's a unique bag that others can't use, and anyway, he wants to know if they'll hire him as a porter now. The blonde guy tells him to stop being so full of himself. Even with a porter's magic bag, it wasn't impressive. The other 2 guards apologized to Mr. Jeff. Jeffnum, leader of the United Dawn Wolf Party and a gold-tier swordsman, announces he will hire Nagi. However, he looks at his glove, warning him that he needs to earn that gold. If he doesn't do the work of 5 porters, he'd better be prepared for the consequences. Nagi wonders if this guy is the party leader. He seemed quite strict, as Jeff warns him to start preparing his gear for the expedition. But the protagonist just thinks that this is perfect for him. After all, he is a professional porter. Before this dungeon conquest ends, he'll leave them completely satisfied. The reason Nagi earns so much more than other porters wasn't simply due to his carrying skills. It was because of the impressive satisfaction of the adventurers. Adventurers who conquer dungeons face countless dangers, and traps can spring at any moment, not to mention enemy ambushes charging toward them. Jeff warns that they are coming. Then the group engages in a bloody battle with the goblins. Dungeon conquests are filled with countless variables, leading to considerable stress. Jeff demands to know if he hadn't ordered him to keep his guard up, questioning if it was because he was nervous. His colleagues begin arguing because of this. Nagi reflects that this was exactly why. He became the porter who targeted this niche market. So he sets his backpack down and calls out to the adventurers, telling them they must be hungry after so much relentless conquering, and that he brought snacks for them. The 2 are surprised by the food, questioning what that is and that spectacular smell. Nagi stands there with a plate of food, using the porter class secret skill, Dungeon Restaurant. The adventurers eat very quickly, commenting that it was so hot it seemed freshly made, and another says even the salad was fresh. He hasn't eaten anything but dried meat and meat as hard as a brick. It was incredible that the backpack had the ability to keep food fresh and even cook it. Nagi replies that it was something like that. The important thing was that they hadn't seen anything yet, opening the backpack further. His backpack becomes a large well of water, revealing an infinite hose. Nagi uses his porter skill, Arcadian Paradise, to create a bathtub. The bearded adventurer says he really is in a resort now, because it was like being in a hot spring in the middle of winter. But this definitely wasn't that scenario. Still, It was incredible. Jeff says that right at this moment, they are acting like they are on vacation, and doing something like this in the dungeon will only weaken discipline. But it was too warm to scold anyone, as he gets into the tub too. He says he has no choice but to acknowledge it. Honestly, he decided to try it, thinking he was just taking a risk, and there was no way this was worth 50 gold coins. He was planning to complain to the association and demand compensation, but for a carrier capable of such magic, 50 gold coins seems like a bargain. Nagi asks, isn't that just how dungeon conquests are? Visitors might think the difficulty lies only in dealing with powerful monsters, but in reality, it's the tension and environmental variables. Things like stomach aches from bad meals or failing due to lack of sleep weren't rare. A dungeon porter ultimately lives off adventures, and to make money, the adventurers must clear the dungeon. So he's been doing what he can to ensure the clear. It's nothing special. The bearded guy laughs at that, saying that's an understatement, since they rarely get this treatment even outside of dungeons. After receiving all this care, he feels energized and feels like he can easily handle any enemy waiting for them, standing up while warning him not to worry about clearing the dungeon. As he said, the conquest progressed without issue. They were already a skilled party that handled groups of monsters with ease. The problem was the boss monster, which is always full of unexpected variables. Jeff applies fire magic to his sword, commenting that it would be complicated. Therefore, they shouldn't give any openings, executing a high-pressure attack. The boss extends its hand as high as it can and then slams it onto the ground. The bearded guy fires arrows at it non-stop, activating his spiderweb skill. However, the boss uses its tail. It gets blocked by a shield. His shield bearer is thrown far away. At that moment, Jeff seizes the opportunity to move his sword, using swordsman's multiplication. With a simple movement, he slices off the tip of the boss's tail, but the monster prepares a blast, which is easily deflected by Jeff's swordsmanship. The swordsman keeps trying to advance. Nagi watches all of this from afar, commenting that this time the boss was a B-rank conquest target, the Zarkum lizard. Judging by the adventurer's skills so far, the chance of success was over 80%, and seems like a stable probability, but even 20% can't be ignored. A failed conquest means losing the porter's life, and that is not an option. Wondering if he should give a little help, Nagi reaches deep inside his backpack. Then he grabs a ball, saying that's where it was. The adventurer's attack power was sufficient, and creating even a single opening would be enough for a successful clear. Of course, it was wasteful to use such an expensive smoke mushroom, but right now, the priority was clearing the dungeon, so he had no other choice, moving it onto a belt because the point was to hit the target. That lizard continues advancing against the group of adventurers, ready to bite Jeff, who was defending himself. Nagi thinks that no matter how unpredictable the movements are, this was the time, moving the smoke upwards. Jeff smiles, advancing with the lizard distracted. Then he uses its back as a jumping platform, moving his sword toward the boss's head. The lizard finally opens its eyes, but ends up getting hit by the blow and having its head embedded in the ground. Jeff just stands up from there, congratulating the good work, and telling them to collect the loot. Well, the dungeon conquest ended well in the end, but the excitement lasted only briefly. The atmosphere quickly soured, and the reason was the meager rewards. From the boss monster, there should have been at least 20 B-grade magic stones, but only 5 dropped. Furthermore, the rest was treated as trash. To make matters worse, this dungeon consisted mainly of common monsters like goblins. In other words, comparing the cost and effort of this conquest with the rewards, it was a complete loss for the party. To make matters worse, they have to split these meager rewards among the 4 of them. Maybe that's why the joy of clearing the dungeon vanished, and the atmosphere grew tense. Even dividing the loot became a touchy subject, but Nagi wondered what he could even say. Since this was the business of adventuring, it was none of his concern. Porters got a fixed salary no matter how much they earned. So before the situation got worse, he decided to wrap things up. He pulled out 2 bottles of booze, thanking the adventurers for their hard work. He offered them a drink, figuring they must be thirsty. Jeff remarked that he even takes care of their post-party needs. The smoke bomb he threw at the boss had been their biggest stroke of luck in the dungeon. Nagi admitted he was caught. He just gave a little help with his modest skills. Another guard approached, saying the more he saw, the more impressed he got. This bunch of youngsters kept producing endless wonders. Nagi wondered why the mood seemed to be taking a strange turn, until something hit the bottle in his hand. An arrow stopped in the rock behind him. Nagi wondered what that was until another arrow approached. Then he dodged it with relative ease, complaining that this was bullshit. He wanted to know what they were doing. The bearded guy said it looked like he missed. He was trying to end it all at once without any pain, but he should think about it, since adventuring was a job where you risk your life. and the results can't be a total loss. The guard told him not to hold a grudge against them, since they were also in trouble with paying their taxes. Honestly, a bag like that was too much for a carrier. Nagi wondered if it would really be like this. A dungeon porter's job usually ends in losing their life in the middle of the journey. Even if they took his life, they could just say he lost it to goblins, and no one would even find it strange, since no matter how hard he tried, he was just a tool. The expressions of those who once appreciated his efforts immediately turned towards someone looking at the loot, but he wasn't surprised, much less embarrassed. This was a common occurrence in this world. In a place where your job is determined from birth, the treatment received by carriers was the lowest rank. This never changed, and never will. When he first gained this skill from the bag, the looks of contempt from people were sharp. A receptionist warned that with this ability, he could not register as an adventurer. She had already told him several times that he should go to the transport area. If he really wanted to participate in dungeon missions, he must register as a carrier. Thus, Nagi thought the world decided he couldn't become an adventurer since it classified him as a porter. These guys must have thought the same way. A guard said that if he understood, he should hand over everything he had and go to hell, then advanced, calling him a useless bag carrier. Nagi dodged the blow, thinking that this decision didn't belong to him to decide, opening his eyes wide now. From inside his bag, the young man pulled out a sword and deflected the blow. The guard wondered how he managed to do that. Nagi planted his foot on the ground, advancing at an absurd speed without even drawing the sword from its sheath. Then he hit the guard with the hilt of the sword. The bearded guy asked what the hell that was. Nagi pulled an axe from inside his bag, throwing it randomly into the air, and thus cutting the strings of the bearded guy's crossbow. That man got surprised by this. Jeff wondered how this was possible, because Dolph had really been taken down. Then he got enraged by this, asking what the hell this was, and if they couldn't put an end to him at once, so the two advanced. Nagi took a hose from inside the backpack, using it to stop them from approaching and making the bearded guy retreat thanks to the temperature. Then, without wasting a second, he saw a battle thread while advancing with the sword, splitting the bearded guy in the middle with a cut. The chubby one got scared by this, trying to run but getting hit by a punch and thus being thrown far away. Nagi just kept a cold expression on his face. Jeff noticed his friend was defeated, getting completely shocked and asking if he really defeated 3 adventurers alone. That was impossible since he was just a white rank, wanting to know who the hell he was. Nagi replied that he is just a dungeon porter. After the events inside the dungeon, Nagi stood outside. He quickly realized something was coming. In this case, it was a carriage. So he waved, shouting that it finally arrived there. A woman got out of the carriage, asking if he was the registered carrier, Nagi, because she heard about a crime occurring inside the dungeon, so she came to investigate, as Petra the inspector. But she wanted to know what exactly this was, with the 3 tied up and with swollen faces. Questioning what happened inside the dungeon, Nagi just replied that instead of explaining, it was better to hear directly from there. Suddenly a voice started coming out of the backpack, repeating everything the adventurers had said about taking Nagi's life. Petra said this was fascinating, because it was a recorder disguised as a bag and had an inefficient design, but Nagi just stated that it was a bag that records sounds. The girl changed the subject, speaking that she understood they betrayed and tried to take his life, but what made her curious was how a carrier like him managed to defeat 4 adventurers, and it seemed they were poisoned by the smoke mushrooms, and Nagi got happy for her knowing about them. Petra replied that she only knew enough to know that eating them in this region causes muscle rigidity, dizziness, and purplish coloration on the face. Nagi replied that this simplified things, and it turned out they simply ate a stew with mushrooms when they were about to attack him. Then the system appeared, and it was sheer luck on his part, since a mere porter couldn't handle adventurers otherwise. He questioned if he wasn't telling the truth with a threatening look. Jeff thought these words were a lie, and for sure they ate poisonous mushrooms, but it wasn't against their will since they were in his trap. Back to their fight, Nagi called for Jeff, asking if he was really a gold-level adventurer, then made a cut that Jeff managed to deflect. The hand-to-hand battle continued, with Nagi completely pressing the swordsman, who only managed to defend. Finally, both blows ended up being reflected. Jeff had thought there was something strange, because even though they spent a lot of energy against the boss monster, the idea that his group lost to a porter simply didn't make sense. Nagi started bursting into laughter, advancing over while questioning how he managed to defeat a goblin with that slow sword. Jeff tried a cut while thinking he was ashamed for being dominated by a carrier, and his provocations made him lose composure. Nagi continued with the smile on his face, dodging the blow with extreme ease while provoking him. Jeff tried one more time, however, was avoided again, then focused energy on the sword, trying one last time, again being simply dodged. Nagi mocked his blows while dodging. Jeff got even more infuriated and called him a bastard, making an arcing cut this time, but which Nagi dodged going to his back. At that time, the reason why Jeff lost to the carrier was not because he was strong, but because he got weak with his body hurting suddenly. He wondered what the hell this was, because he felt like he would vomit, and even already did that. Nagi questioned if he didn't tell him, since they were all poisoned. The food they ate had a poisonous mushroom called smoke mushroom, and it enhances the flavor of the dish, besides dealing with cheating clients. Jeff questioned about this poison, and if this is true. Then he planned to betray them from the beginning. Nagi just sighed arrogantly, questioning how a delicate carrier like him could trust suspicious adventurers, but as he said, it was just insurance. Whether the betrayal happened or not depended entirely on them, and in a situation like this, using a catalyst would make the poisonous effects come to light. But normally he would give the antidote after finishing the dungeon to completely neutralize the poison, but some idiot before that had broken his bottles when he offered. Then he questioned what he could do about it, since there was only one vial of antidote left. Jeff thought that even though that was how everything happened in this situation, saying that he poisoned them didn't seem true and confirmed the story, shouting that it was just bad luck to eat the wrong stew, reflecting that losing to a porter was humiliating. The three members of the group cried while repeating that it would be okay if they hadn't eaten that stew. Petra analyzed the situation with her finger on her chin. Then she said that now she understood the situation and was going to send these criminals to be transported. Nagi turned to leave, saying that his business was finished and he would go away, but Petra asked him to wait. If you're heading back to town, I could offer a ride. Nagi analyzes the situation for a few seconds, wondering if it would be free. On the way to the city in the carriage, Petra says it's a shame he had such an unfortunate experience right after arriving. On behalf of the Adventurers Association, she apologizes. Nagi says it was fine. Porters are used to things like that. Petra says even so, there's something he needs to know. Although she understands he wasn't to blame for the incident, they wouldn't see it that way. The adventurers he subjugated were all members of the Dawn Guild. That guild was famous there for its arrogance and lawlessness. No matter the reason, if one of their members suffers damage, they will retaliate. So for a while, he must be careful, until she becomes completely confused. Nagi had his head buried in his backpack. Petra asks if he was listening, and the boy confirms. Then something pops its head out. Nagi complains he told Gluttony not to come out in front of people because they'll freak out. Gluttony replies that it was hungry. Petra asks what in the world that was, and Nagi says not to worry about it. This little one was Gluttony, and it had been living in his bag for a long time. It organizes items inside. Before Gluttony started helping, his things were always getting tangled. In exchange, it eats tons of magic stones. Considering how chaotic this journey has been, it's also been quite busy. Besides, he managed to pocket all the dungeon loot, which would normally be divided among the 4 adventurers. So he says, since he was feeling generous, he's going to double the magic stones for today. Gluttony just eats with a happy expression. Petra says it was her first time seeing a magical creature that eats stones. Nagi says it was the same for him, but it was a beneficial relationship since it causes no harm. The inspector says he was fascinating, or rather his bag was, since she had never heard of anything like it. Suddenly, the coachman's horses rear up, stomping their hooves hard on the ground. Everyone in the carriage gets scared. Petra asks what happened to the horses suddenly. The coachman replies that he's not sure. They just got agitated all of a sudden. Nagi realizes something, turning back because he recognizes this feeling. There was no doubt about what it was. A dungeon break was happening there. Nagi calls the inspector's name, pointing in a different direction while warning that he can sense a dungeon break beyond the mountain. Petra shouts about the dungeon break. It was a huge problem, and she wants to know how he noticed and if he has some kind of magic tool. Nagi says it was just instinct. Petra questions what he means by that. The protagonist grabs a piece of wood, saying there's no time. They need to act quickly before there are casualties. Petra thinks sensing a break by instinct was absurd. Even she, as an inspector, couldn't detect it. Gluttony says it really was a dungeon break. She likes magic stones and can smell them, and that's why there is a huge smell of magic stones beyond that mountain. She is absolutely sure of it. Petra understands and says they should take a look. When a dungeon exists for a long time, it will go through a catastrophic event called a dungeon break. That's when the monsters inside come out en masse and cause an uproar, taking lives indiscriminately along their path. That was why they must subjugate the dungeons in this world. Petra says it has gone far past the critical point, and the break will happen at any moment. She wants to know how he sensed it from so far away. Nagi replies that he could never forget this sinister feeling. It's something one should never forget. His young vision was completely shocked, standing in front of a totally decimated place. That was how horrible things become when a dungeon break occurs. Petra wonders if this man has gone through this before. But even if he has, it doesn't make sense for him to be able to sense it. Nagi says there's something strange there. If a dungeon were so close to the village, there's no way adventurers wouldn't have subjugated it by now. Petra says that's right, and according to records, this dungeon has already been assigned. Nagi questions who accepted the mission and their qualifications. The girl says it was a D-rank rift dungeon, assigned to 1 mithril class adventurer and 2 copper class. Nagi wonders about a mithril adventurer for just a D rank dungeon. In that case, he has his suspicions. He questions what she will do, since he needs to go to the village to confirm something. Petra replies that it must be what he suspects, so she asks the guard to transport those criminals to prison for her. As a dungeon inspector, she will accompany him. Both stand in front of the dungeon with the village. That village was a peaceful place, but the citizens were gathered in a corner. Nagi says there is definitely something happening there. The citizens shout that it's been so long they should have solved this, but they haven't. If a dungeon break happens, Nero, copper rank, tells them to take it to the group leader. Vandeshtar agrees that it wasn't their responsibility. They want to know what the villagers expect them to do since the leader disappeared. The citizens call them bastards. Nagi thinks he was right, judging by the situation. It was a dungeon no-show. This happens when a leader of higher rank than the dungeon signs up. Then, if a better dungeon is discovered in the meantime, the leader completely abandons the low-rank dungeon. Petra says it was clear the association imposes fines in cases like this. Nagi says it was nothing more than a slap on the wrist, and the girl agrees. The protagonist thinks that's it. Adventurers can get away with just a fine, but the people there would lose everything. This dungeon will break tonight. Even if they ask the Adventurers Association for help, by the time they arrive, everything will already be in ashes. And yet these adventurers are spewing irresponsible excuses, shouting that they are also victims because they were losing their precious time, and there was no point in being blamed. If they have complaints, they must register them in the official complaint of the Adventurers Association. Since they aren't the only ones responsible, they don't need to hear this from him. Nagi thinks that adventurers aren't heroes or saviors. They are cruel people who only care about their own profit, but even so, in this situation, the power most needed was theirs because only adventurers can stop a dungeon break, not a porter like him. Petra says it was unfortunate, but they must evacuate the residents since saving lives should be the priority. Nagi questions that, because he really believes they can save it. Petra asks what he means by that, and the protagonist tells her to think. Winter was coming too, and those who lose their homes won't survive the harsh winter. That was impossible, so he removes his porter necklace. He puts on the gold one, thinking the village doesn't need a porter. Nagi bursts out laughing then, approaching while saying what's over here. A dungeon break happening in a village he just visited. He questions if anyone can subjugate the ruined dungeon without paying any fee, and Petra confirms. The protagonist says it was great luck. Meanwhile, Vandeshtar questions who this guy is to plan on facing the dungeon, until they notice the color of the badge. It was a gold rank adventurer, so it might actually be possible. Nagi asks if they were thinking of participating too. In that case, the reward split was 9-1, a dungeon that had breaks. It was a dungeon connected to an unknown dimension through a rift. It's recommended that only adventurers of at least gold rank or higher enter, unlike normal dungeons, regardless of their difficulty, which can be simply completed by defeating all monsters. In a rift dungeon, your true enemy is space itself. Even experienced adventurers can't predict the clear conditions. The risks of disappearing or losing your life are higher, making this the most avoided dungeon type. And yet, they are about to do a speedrun. Petra warns that after checking the magic limit, this dungeon will break in an hour. Nagi replies that in other words, they need to complete it in an hour. But within an hour, no matter what appears, it's going to be tight, especially if it's a rift dungeon. They can only hope it's an easy dungeon, since they can't waste a single minute or second. They must go there immediately. Inside the dungeon, an entrance seems to break, illuminating Nero's eyes. It was a desert with dozens of floating rocks. Nero comments that a moment ago it was night, but now they are in another world. Vandeshtar says the rookie's first subjugation begins, and the girl agrees they should show those bastards from the association. The necromancer claims he's going to put on such a performance that the association won't know what to say. Watching from afar, Petra thinks that ignorance really is bliss sometimes. One look was all it took to know they were doomed. Nagi agreed. The scene unfolding before them seemed like it was being written in real time. Petra says they need to climb it within an hour. She yells that he had to lie, but Nagi says he had no choice. If they asked for help as porters, the adventurers would just ignore them. But if a gold rank adventurer leads, others will follow. It was risky, but if they don't destroy this dungeon, a rupture will occur, and she knew that. Petra confirms. Yes, it needs to be stopped. Nero starts laughing. She asks why all the worry. This is exactly why humans are so boring. She plants her feet firmly. Leaping from rock to rock, she announces she'll climb to the top alone without any issues. Vandeshtar calls out that it's dangerous. Nero materializes fire at her wrists, using it for a boost, but that wasn't her intention, and she gets scared. Suddenly, she falls face first onto the ground. Vandeshtar asks if she's stupid, acting without thinking just like in boot camp. Nero asks if he just ignored her. The necromancer tells her to remember their training. Rift dungeons can have restrictions or curses. Petra confirms that's exactly it. The first step in any rift dungeon is identifying its curse. She uses her scout talent, and chains reveal themselves on Vandeshtar and Nero. Petra explains this must be the dungeon's curse. They are all bound by these intangible, invisible chains, meaning they have to move together. Nagi notes that it seems tricks and shortcuts won't work in this dungeon. Fortunately, he brought plenty of climbing gear, which impresses Nero. The protagonist tells them they need to take it step by step. That is the key to clearing a trick-based dungeon. They shouldn't waste energy, but they can't go too slow either. They need to maintain a balanced pace. Nagi tells them to follow his lead. He reminds them that since they are chained, they can't let the distance between them get too wide. They need to maintain a consistent gap while moving. Nero complains the leader is too slow and says she'll run ahead to scout. Nagi immediately shuts that down. Rushing ahead is far worse than moving a bit slower, but planning a clear route without backtracking. Of course, even if you map the route carefully, the problem is that rift dungeons are always full of unpredictable variables. They come face to face with an immense stone pig. The creature opens its mouth and eats a rock. Nagi thinks the path is completely blocked, all because of an unknown monster. Petra identifies the monster as a rock-devouring pig. It's powerful but not aggressive. As long as they don't provoke it, they'll be fine. Just like the compendium says, it digests quickly. It constantly eats and expels, altering the dungeon's layout as it moves. This ecosystem is fascinating, even if it is her first time seeing one. Back to the issue at hand. This is a problem because the platform they were going to climb has completely disappeared. Their only option now is to throw the grappling hook and attach the rope to the stone pig. But if they miss and provoke the pig, it could become aggressive. They don't have the time or energy to fight it. Vandeshtar says that's the problem. Finally, it's his time to shine. He tells everyone to watch closely as he uses his powers. They must witness how he overcomes this challenge. He throws 2 fingers. His necromancer talent is finger summoning. They begin to take on 2 humanoid shapes. The bone golems appear, Slyordy and Clubby. Nagi notes that it's impressive. Summoning skills like that are very rare. Petra adds that they can secure the rope without provoking the stone pig. But the protagonist questions why they look. The 2 golems begin to tremble and contort. Nagi continues, saying they look strange. Nero explains that he's been famous since training camp as Explosive Van. He's known for his lack of control over summons that tend to blow up. Vandeshtar says controlling summons is like looking in a mirror and trying to move both sides separately. Still, as long as they cross in under 5 minutes, it should be fine. Nagi says it'll be a bit risky, but they have no time to waste. They need to cross before they explode. He throws the rope toward the golems. They use teamwork to support themselves on the platform, but the rope ends up hitting the golem's face. Vandeshtar feels the pain. He yells at him to be careful because his nerves are linked to the summon, so he feels it too. Nagi starts climbing the rope. He thinks that for a high-level dungeon, they got a little lucky. His companion's skills are well suited for this dungeon, especially the summon, which makes clearing it much easier. Nagi thinks something is wrong. There are only 3 minutes left. Vandeshtar tells him to hurry because the situation isn't good, but the protagonist says the summon looks weird. The necromancer apologizes. It's going to explode. The crack in its head made it unstable. He was already nauseous and now he can't hold it back anymore. The golem's body begins to swell. It causes a massive explosion right there, affecting the rock-devouring pig. The monster is startled by it. The rope begins falling toward the ground. The group is heading that way too. Nagi shouts that they're doomed. They have to grab onto something, but he realizes if they fall back to the starting point, there's no way they'll reach the top. Now he needs to reduce damage somehow by moving quickly mid-air. Nagi uses a secret porter technique. It's called airbag, making the group land on top of the bag. With that, they are launched upward. Nagi uses the pig as support. He pulls his backpack up to the top as well. He asks if everyone is okay. Petra confirms they are, thanks to him, but their progress took a major hit. They still need to reach the top within the time limit. Nagi says they have no choice if they want to make it on time. From now on, the 2 adventurers will have to match his stamina. He pulls out a special porter tool, the sticky climbing set. He tells everyone to get ready. They are headed straight for the top. They cannot let their guard down for a single second. If one falls, they all fall together, and the closer they get to the top, the more dangerous it will be. Nagi approaches the rockfall zone. Next, they move onto the icy surface. They even pass through a resistance zone against monkeys. Finally, they reach an explosive rock zone. The 2 adventurers are completely exhausted and ask if they're there yet. Nagi says they're almost there, just a little bit more, but the adventurers complain that's the 10th time he said that. Nero complains that she wants to fight monsters. She didn't become an adventurer to be a mountain climber. Nagi says this time he's serious. You can see the top from here. It seems the boss monster is waiting up there. The two adventurers are happy about the boss monster. They're going to crush the monster and wipe the smile off the association's face for ranking them as copper. Nagi thinks he understands. Based on their physical abilities and talent, they don't belong in the copper class. It's probably because necromancers are looked down upon, and beast people only recently gained freedom from slavery. Nero says that in the worst-case scenario, the leader will handle it. Van confirms, since he's a gold rank. Meanwhile, Nagi just reflects that he brought those two along specifically to handle the monster, but Petra asks them to wait a moment. Something seems strange here. The boss monster at the top is a serpent dragon, but they shouldn't be purple. If a serpent dragon is purple, it can only mean one thing. It's already dead. Nagi questions what she just said. A sword is already lodged in the dragon's body. The man up there yawns, waking quickly from his sleep. He asks what all that noise is. He looks down, surprised. Then he starts staring coldly at the group. Nagi thinks, this is killing intent. He begins to resist. The adventurer jumps toward the rock in a split second. He gets close to the stone while Nagi just barely dodges the advance. The adventurer lands incredibly fast. The protagonist notices the medallion on his chest, thinking it's mithril rank, and if that's true, this can't be just a simple dungeon failure. The adventurer remarks that this is going to be a hassle. He didn't expect anyone to enter this dungeon, seeing as it needs to be broken. Nagi thinks that sometimes there are people like this who intentionally cause dungeons to break. The adventurer states that officially, the four of them lost their lives during the expedition. Petra confronts the adventurer head-on. She warns that the dungeon is about to rupture, and it's an adventurer's first duty to stop it, but he just questions that obligation. Then he bursts out laughing. He says he doesn't care about duties. Adventurers act for their own benefit, after all. A dungeon break can be way more profitable than clearing one. Nagi thinks he gets it now. He never thought of adventurers as heroes or saviors, but he didn't expect trash like this. If this guy really intends to cause a dungeon break, Nagi has to stop him no matter what. However, the guy is ranked mithril. Fighting him now is asking to lose. Nagi takes off his backpack, claiming there's been a misunderstanding. They're just passing adventurers who happen to find the dungeon. They didn't want to get in the way, so he should consider this buzzing skewer an apology gift. Staying in the dungeon must have made him hungry. Nagi thinks fighting this piece of trash directly won't work. He has to weaken him first. The adventurer quickly bites into the skewer. He yells that it's incredible and hot, like it just came out of the oven. It really was impressive to be able to make this. The meat is perfectly grilled, and the shrimp is just right. Nagi thinks he should eat his fill, since the food contains his poison. But the adventurer grabs his shoulder tightly. He mentions the exquisite taste of smoked mushrooms added to the sauce especially. He asks if Nagi thought such a cheap trick would work. Then he prepares his payment, winding up his fist. The punch approaches Nagi's face. The protagonist manages to defend, but is thrown far back by the recoil. Nero grabs the chain with her wrist, but suddenly she's pulled backward. Her foot is forced back, enduring the pull of the chain as she calls out to the team leader. Nagi lands on another rock. Nero asks what they should do now. The adventurer remarks they must be rookies who can't even break curse chains. Just bad luck. Nero turns quickly at that, but that adventurer rushes at her, yelling that this dungeon will be her last. He tries to punch the girl. Van Destar steps forward, telling Nero not to just stand there. An immense explosion of smoke appears on the spot. It slowly begins to dissipate, with the adventurer emerging from it with a sigh. He asks what's up with this rude summoned creature. He wants to know if the rookie is a necromancer. Van Destar asks if he was the one, the group leader who got approval to enter the dungeon but gave up. The mithril rank adventurer replies he wanted to know who volunteered for this dungeon everyone avoids. So it was them, a necromancer and a beast woman. No wonder people said it was a bunch of idiots. Van Destar tells Nero not to worry. When the leader returns, it will be 3 against 1. All they have to do is wait until then. Especially against physical attacks, his patchwork golem can withstand a lot. Just like they practiced on the training field, they advance against the adventurer. That man keeps the smile on his face. He causes another explosion there, while Nagi stays on another rock. The boy was unconscious for a moment, but he wakes up a few instants later, muttering. Petra asks if Nagi is really okay. She's already performed first aid for now. The protagonist thanks her, realizing he must have blacked out for a moment. He asks about the situation. The girl replies, it's not good at all. Nero and Van Destar are holding firm, but they are constantly being overpowered by the adventurer. He defends against a kick from Nero. The girl pulls back and spins with her kick once more. However, all are blocked with ease. The adventurer continues with the evil smile on his face. Then he spins the patchwork golem in his hand, striking and repelling both of them to stop the fight. Petra continues that, as expected, the opponent is too strong for them to last much longer. Nagi replies he made a mistake. He should have considered that poison wouldn't work on someone of mithril rank. He asks if she could tell him more about the guy. as he must have a reputation. Petra confirms. Among mithril rank adventurers, he is considered unrivaled in close combat. His history of dungeon attacks is also impressive, and he's famous for frequent confrontations with other adventurers, making him skilled in duels, especially his mastery of the huge broadsword. He was famous for cutting even an ogre in half with a single blow. Nagi says it's at least a relief he doesn't have one right now. He hoped to hear about some kind of weakness, but there's no way. Petra says the biggest problem is that even if they manage to defeat him by pure luck, time is running out. It's a race against the clock. Even if their destination is right ahead, there's no way to get there in time. If this chain curse didn't exist, they could have split up and run to the summit. Nagi repeats the chain curse and thinks that's exactly it. They can't see or touch them, but they were all tied by chains. And that's also the detriment. If one of them falls, everyone goes together. But if you think differently, it could also mean a benefit. If one person reaches the top, everyone arrives. If there's a way to use this benefit, maybe they can defeat the mithril adventurer and save time. Even if it's fake, Nagi was still the leader now. If he were the real leader, he'd use every card he has to the max. Individually, none of them are impressive. But if they combine their tools, their abilities, and everything they have, maybe they could change this. So he asks if Petra, with her scout talent, can map the terrain of their destination from this distance. The girl says it's simple, and she could even create a complete map. Nagi tells her to please do it as fast as she can. Petra pulls out a quill and uses her scout talent to write in the air, creating a 3D map of that whole area. The protagonist is impressed by this, saying the level of detail in the map was beyond his expectations. She must be a top-tier inspector. Petra replies these were just basics. She made the map for him, but she doesn't exactly know how he plans to use it. Nagi answers they would use it to take down the beast. This wasn't a battle between humans, but a fight between a human and a beast. When adventurers explore dungeons, they often encounter monsters much stronger than themselves. He asks how they managed to defeat these beasts. Petra replies that maybe using their experience to create strategies. Nagi responds that is incorrect. The secret for adventurers to defeat monsters stronger than them is to use dissimulation. They win by fighting dirty. So, to take down that beast, Nagi jumps back toward the rock, drawing a bow from his backpack. He fires at the adventurer while thinking that they have to play dirty too. The arrow approaches very quickly. The mithril rank adventurer just watches and catches it immediately. He says that even a sneak attack must be effective with these rudimentary arrows. But suddenly an explosion happens. Nagi had used the carrier's secret technique, sticky spider line. The adventurer replies that this was a drag, but the protagonist advances while pulling something from his backpack. That man questions a direct combat. He was finally starting to feel motivated. Nagi uses the carrier's secret technique to launch dozens of mushrooms. The adventurer looks up in surprise. The mushrooms burst into a storm of smoke. The adventurer defends himself from the smoke, asking if he covered the whole area with this. He really was a bastard. On the other side, Deshtar sighs, panting. Nagi asks if everyone is okay, and both confirm. The protagonist continues that he is happy. He asks if Deshtar can summon more golems. The boy replies that his index and middle fingers are regenerating, and he just used his ring finger, so he can still use his pinky and thumb. Nagi replies that should be more than enough. They need to listen carefully because there is a way to turn this situation around. The adventurer finally frees himself from the webs. He says it was a persistent nuisance. He's never heard of a swordsman fighting like this. He wonders if he escaped with his companions to another rock, but fighting is useless. However, he sees a figure in the smoke with a backpack. He keeps muttering as if in conversation. The adventurer says this is pathetic. All that smoke is useless if he makes all that noise. He advances with his fist. His blow was imbued with energy. He strikes the golem's head, causing an immense explosion on the spot. The adventurer keeps his smile on his face, until he realizes what actually happened. He had hit a golem. This same being grabs him quickly. The adventurer asks about the patchwork golem. He wants to know how the golem was talking, but it wasn't him. It was the bag making all the noise. Saying he was caught now, the adventurer turns, questioning where the others went, until he notices a figure holding the rope. Nagi stood in front of him as the smoke cleared. The adventurer realized he planned to sneak to the top while distracting him, but the attempt was too sloppy. Now realizing he won't be able to climb using that rock, Nagi asks if he's sure about that. Deshtar's mouth hangs open. Nagi asks if it's here yet. They've been spotted and need to hurry. The boy asks for just a little longer since it was his first time controlling it from such a distance, but he shouldn't worry about that. His pinky finger was caught on the hook. Then it begins to take shape, turning into a patchwork teddy bear. Deshtar confirms he'll do it for sure. The patchwork golem steps onto the castle, pulling the hook as far as it can, approaching the already defeated dragon. Then it jumps as its final move. Deshtar yells to go now. Finally, the hook is embedded. The golem explodes immediately after, causing an immense radius of destruction action on the castle. The adventurer is incredulous. They rigged all this just to keep him stuck in one place, and it was dangerous. Using strength to break free from the golem, since he just needs to get out as fast as he can. Deshtar replies that won't be easy. The thumb might be slow, but it was the strongest of them all. Nagi keeps holding the rope, looking coldly at the adventurer, reminding him this was a battle against a beast. The dragon on top of the castle starts being pulled. There are beasts that cannot be defeated if your goal wasn't to take down the monster. The dragon falls with its mouth open toward the adventurer, breaking that stone floor and making the adventurer fall toward the ground. The rope was caught on the dragon's scales. Then it starts pulling the rope upward like a lever, lifting the whole group. Nagi thinks there's no need to fight against this as he climbs with his friends. Upon reaching the last island, everyone in the group keeps running. Nagi shouts that they just need to hold on a little longer. They were almost at the end of the dungeon. They're sure about 5 minutes remaining. It was tough, but they can make it. Still, they owe a lot to Nero for her help. If it were up to him, he couldn't have thrown the rope to the top, which looked easy. The fact that she did it with sheer brute force was truly impressive. Nero says it was nothing. Deshtar coughs to get attention, saying that's something anyone strong enough could do, even a fool. No matter what they say, the MVP of this dungeon was him, since he secured the rope in the right spot and even took down that annoying berserker. Maybe he's even better than a mithril rank adventurer, but Nero says he just got beaten up. Petra comments that everyone is excited, and Nagi agrees. The two were probably experiencing their first dungeon conquest. The joy of clearing a dungeon doesn't come from one person's exceptional skill, but from everyone working together to achieve victory. In that sense, Petra played an important role in the dungeon. The girl says she didn't do much. Nagi continues that he knew a dungeon inspector had talent, but he thought it was just basic stuff. Still, she created a very precise map quickly. Thanks to her detailing, he managed to calculate the exact location. He's sure even a professional scout would admire her skill. Petra thinks honestly, compared to what they did, creating and executing that strategy quickly was much more impressive. She wonders if Nagi really is just a porter, and how that's possible. Deshtar asks what's going to happen to that berserker. Nero asks if he even needs to ask. He'll rot in prison for the rest of his life and should be banned forever. Petra responds that she's not so sure. He committed serious crimes, but the problem is he's a mithril rank adventurer. The higher an adventurer's rank, the greater their immunity before the law, especially someone of mithril rank who is protected at a national level. So, most likely, he'll get out of this with just a fine. Deshtar and Nero shout that this is absurd, but the necromancer says he doesn't care. If the law won't punish him, he'll beat him up if they ever meet outside the dungeon. Nagi replies that's a dangerous idea, because what he saw of that berserker was only a fraction of his power. He should look around. The bodies of the Stone Knoll tribe protecting the entrance were all defeated by him alone. Deshtar says he could do that too, and Nero says they just didn't have a chance. Nagi continues that the important part is what comes next. If you examine the wounds on the bodies, they all lost their lives with a single attack. The two are surprised by this. Nagi says an adventurer's talent shines when he uses the right weapon, so they must remember that when they fought, he didn't use the great sword or his talent. He relied only on physical strength and fought very well. Deshtar says it was an absurd difference in skill, but thinking about it now, it makes sense because when they lured him and took down the dragon, his sword was embedded in the heart, and the boss had also lost its life with a single blow. Nagi questions this, shocked, saying this means he already fell with the serpent dragon and must have recovered his great sword. The berserker stood on top of a rock, looking toward the top, saying that now was the time the game would really begin. Nagi realizes what is happening as the ground is being split in half. He yells for everyone to run, until the cut spreads and hits Deshtar. That was the sword that splits giants in 2 pieces. Nagi grabs onto what remains of that rock. With the whole group held only by the chains, he asks if everyone is okay. Petra responds that she is, but the other two seem severely injured, especially Van Deshtar, who is completely unconscious. Nagi thinks this is bad. The destructive power of that last attack was insane, and he had already caught up to them, jumping from rock to rock. Nagi wonders what kind of physical feat that was. If he hesitates even for a second, the berserker will close the distance. Only 3 minutes remained. To stop him from advancing, there's only one option. He was a porter anyway, but he had carried countless loads, training over and over again. If it was about lifting things, he was confident. This moment was no different. He was just carrying as always, a slightly heavier load and climbing. Then he uses the strength of his arms to lift the chain. The whole group is pulled up. Nagi thinks he will bear the weight. Climbing and digging his hand into the stone, he moves his other arm, making the same movement. Time was running out, and the mithril rank adventurer was getting closer. He jumps toward the group. Nagi finally reaches the top. opening his eyes wide and climbing up there. The berserker also jumps toward the last stone, maintaining his smile and murderous intent while Nagi is just surprised. Time begins to run out, but they run to the cathedral that was there. The protagonist approaches with his friends. Seeing a crystal in the center of the room, he yells that it's the dungeon stone, and if he can just destroy this, drawing a weapon from his backpack. Nagi throws the weapon toward the stone, saying it's over. The dagger approaches very quickly, but an explosion happens there. The berserker approaches with his momentum. Nagi watches this, completely surprised. The mithril rank adventurer moves his broadsword, deflecting the dagger away. Then he stands in front of the dungeon stone, warning that time is up. An explosion occurs right after. The energy begins to consume the whole room, reaching the protagonist and his allies. A rift begins to take over that whole dimension, opening more and more. Outside, it reaches the village. A villager watches this, frightened, then calls out to his god, questioning why he had abandoned them. Monsters start coming out from inside the rift, forming an army of the stone knoll race, who begin to cause chaos in that land. The monsters start to salivate. Suddenly, the dragon also comes out from inside, roaring loudly as Nero stands up. She comments that the dungeon monsters revived, and Petra says they are coming out non-stop. This is a dungeon break. The berserker has Nagi's neck in his hands and starts laughing, saying the sight of a dungeon break is magnificent, and no matter how many times he sees it, he never gets tired of it. Nagi asks if he means it wasn't his first time causing a break. The berserker confirms it because a weakling like him wouldn't understand. When a dungeon breaks, it eventually regenerates into something even stronger. In other words, it becomes a dungeon with better rewards. Nagi questioned if the man did everything just for that. Didn't he care at all about the people in the village? The berserker repeated the sentiment. Just for that. After all, an adventurer only cares about one thing: acquiring better rewards. What happened to weaklings like them was none of his business. Nagi thought it all felt so familiar. Adventurers aren't heroes or saviors. They are purely selfish beings driven by self-interest. He despised them. He had seen just how much destruction an adventurer with great power could cause. However, there is another side to the story. Although much rarer, there exist adventurers possessing both great power and great virtue. A woman flew over the village aboard a griffin. She took a bite out of a piece of bread, noting that everything was ready. The target was confirmed. She stood up. She intended to eliminate the fissure before it could widen any further. She unleashed a slash of fire directly at the dragon. The monsters were also defeated by the blast. They tried to escape, only to run straight into the flames. The berserker was surprised by the sudden intervention, and Petra turned around. The adventurer finally touched down on the ground. She introduced herself as Agnesa Farid, vice captain of Twilight Wind. She demanded an explanation for what happened here. The monsters from the fissure were being obliterated. Nagi could finally breathe again after being released. Petra approached and asked if Nagi was okay. The protagonist confirmed he was fine, but said it was more important for her to look. The rupture in the dungeon was beginning to diminish. Nagi yelled that it was closing. The berserker murmured at the sight. He remarked that even if it was a lower-level dungeon, opening a rupture with a single blow was impressive. He thought Twilight Wind was an extinct guild and wanted to know what brought Agnesa there. The woman simply addressed Durakan of the Dawn Guild. Judging by the scene, there was no need for explanations. There was no way a mithril rank adventurer would fail a dungeon like this. He had purposefully caused a rupture in the dungeon. Durakan asked if she was trying to pick a fight. He thought Agnesa of Twilight Wind was someone he wanted to face at least once. But this wasn't the ideal situation, as the swordsman's little tricks had made him waste more stamina than he expected, and he had strict orders from his master not to cause too much of a mess. Besides, looking at the gem in his hand, he hadn't achieved his main objective anyway. Since that was the case, there was no need to fight. He sheathed his sword. Agnesa asked if he was running away. Durakan questioned that characterization. He replied that this was a rift dungeon. Even for him, success depended on variables, so he couldn't guarantee victory. Nero screamed that he was a liar. He wasn't just avoiding clearing the dungeon, he tried to stop them and take their lives. Durakan asked if that was really the case. It was a shame to hear that, but he claimed a curse prevented newbies from distinguishing friends from foes, which meant attacking them hadn't been his intention. If she didn't believe him, she could verify it herself, but the dungeon had already disappeared. That explanation was good enough for the association to accept. He asked if the inspector agreed. Petra thought it was clearly absurd, but she had seen it happen many times in the adventurer's tribunal. The weight of mithril rank carried more weight than the truth. It didn't matter how much copper or white rank adventurers testified. Against mithril, not even the truth would solve it. The worst part was that he knew it and exploited that fact. Durakan said that in that case, they were finished here. He even bid farewell to the newbies. Agnesa continued to observe him coldly. Nagi sighed, saying that at least the rupture in the dungeon had been stopped. stopped. Then he began to fall. He collapsed to his knees on the ground, and his friends all screamed for him. Agnesa watched the scene from behind. Nagi went completely unconscious from exhaustion, but the adventurer noticed all the marks and injuries. Her bird spread its wings. Agnesa announced they would place him there, and Agamemnon could take them to the city in short order. The group agreed with her plan, and so the tumultuous expedition to the Rift Dungeon came to an end. The village greeted the morning without suffering any damage. Later, the Adventurers Association visited the village, offering apologies and promising to avoid future incidents. But of course, it was just talk, and with Agnesa's help, Nagi arrived somewhere far away, the western city of adventures, Bethlehem. There was a bird statue atop a house. This was the nest where the wind rests, the office of the Twilight Wind Guild. Nagi was sleeping but suddenly woke up. He became aware of his surroundings. He opened his eyes and found himself lying in a shabby bed. He sat up straight, wondering where he was. He asked Petra, who was sleeping at the foot of the bed. The girl woke up immediately. She was happy to see Nagi awake and asked how he was feeling. The protagonist replied that he was fine, while Nero and Deshtar yelled that he had scared them, and they thought he was lifeless. Nagi wondered where he was, as he only remembered up until the berserker left. Petra explained that it was the office of the Twilight Wind Guild, and Nero shouted that the nice lady had saved him. She even called a priest from the church to heal him. Nagi said that might explain it because, other than tiredness, he didn't feel injured. It was a relief to see the two of them healthy. Deshtar said it was nothing, and Nero was confident in her resilience. But the necromancer continued that, in any case, their first adventure had been quite a journey. When he saw how happy the villagers were that they stopped the dungeon rupture, he realized what the true role of an adventurer was. A little girl had offered him a flower and thanked him for protecting them. For the two of them, it was just a dungeon for rewards and glory. But for the villagers, it was their home. They both apologized for acting arrogantly. Nero said she would become a great adventurer, and Deshtar cried as he said they had saved a village. Nagi smiled, saying it was good to hear that. He thought he was happy they managed to protect the village, but now that it was over, he had to reveal the truth, that he wasn't a gold rank adventurer. In fact, his rank was lower than both of theirs, since he was just a low rank porter. He wondered if they would treat him the same way when they knew, but it was clear they wouldn't. Nagi opened a smile on his face. He said he needed to tell them something, and they shouldn't get mad. Nagi confessed to them that he had been pretending to be an adventurer and acting as their leader. Their natural reaction was to freeze. Nero asked if that was really true, but they understood, and there was nothing to be done. Thus, the bond built on lies disappeared, and they went back to being just adventurers and a porter. Nero said that next time, he would carry her equipment. They were leaving now, so he should rest. They closed the door right after. Petra asked if Nagi really needed to tell them the truth. The protagonist replied that they would become great adventurers. Working as a porter in the city, he would certainly meet them again. It was better they heard it from him than discovered it later. Petra clenched her fist and called Nagi's name. She said he was right. He wasn't an adventurer. In her work as an inspector, she had lived through countless adventures. Most of them only care about personal gain and don't hesitate to commit atrocities for it. Unlike heroes, adventurers live only for their profit. But Nagi hadn't done that. Even though there was nothing to gain, he conquered the dungeon and risked his life just to save lives without asking for anything. So Nagi really isn't an adventurer. He is a hero. She placed the boy's hand on her chest. Nagi was left with no response to that. He wondered about it while thinking he really wasn't a hero. While everyone's attention had been on Durakan and Agnesa's conversation during the rupture, Nagi noticed something behind him. Several stars were shining and falling. He thought it was a reward for completing a rift dungeon, and this was his lucky day. Running and grabbing the chest, Nagi used every last drop of strength to collect the rewards before fainting from exhaustion. He laughed internally while grabbing his backpack. He had gained all the rewards for himself twice in a row, and would take a look later. Petra wasn't the only one who misunderstood Nagi that day. Nero and Van Deshtar did too. They talked about how their team leader was a protector. Deshtar asked if she had realized it too. Nero replied that it was obvious. He was pretending to be a humble porter when in reality, he was a gold rank adventurer. Nagi probably thought he had fooled them, and that they were idiots. The protagonist little knew they were even bigger idiots than he imagined. And to be fair, based on the way Nagi fought, it was hard to believe he was just a porter. Meanwhile, at the same time, small incidents like a snowball began to roll, creating an avalanche. Durakan walked toward his master's room. Stopping right behind the hooded figure, He mentions hearing the story, noting there had been interference. Durakan replies that it was shameful. He'd encountered a strange swordsman alongside the Twilight Wind Guild. His master questions if he hasn't forgotten something important. The Dawn Guild cannot ignore troublemakers, whether they are fake adventurers or the Twilight Wind itself. Elsewhere, inside her office, Agnesa paces back and forth. She thinks to herself, if what Petra said on the way here is true, then Nagi could really be something special. Earlier, during the incident atop Agamemnon, she had called for the inspector. She warned that it would take time to reach the city and demanded the entire story first. She wanted to know everything. Why Petra was there, how Nagi got so badly injured. She wanted the whole truth. Petra had entered the Rift Dungeon without permission, and she asked how Agnesa knew. Agnesa replied that the group's composition didn't match the registered subjugation team, but she assured Petra it was okay. This was a private conversation, and she didn't plan to report it officially. She just wanted to verify one thing. They had been investigating a series of chain dungeon breaks and discovered a possible connection to the Dawn Guild. That was why she happened to be there today. Petra said she heard that, but asked how the Dawn Guild was connected. Agnesa replied that it was just a theory for now. The inspector said if that were the case, she understood. However, Agnesa shouldn't just keep Nagi's illegal actions a secret. She should be praising him instead. Petra proceeded to explain everything, from how they entered the dungeon to what happened inside. Agnesa reflected on the story. A gold-ranked adventurer had supposedly led them, but in reality, it was a mere porter who successfully conquered the dungeon. If not for the Dawn Guild's interference, he certainly would have cleared it solo. Clearing a rift dungeon was something even seasoned adventurers avoided, but what truly deserved glory was his mindset, risking his own life to prevent a dungeon break. Nagi turned to the captain, recognizing her as the one who saved them. Agnesa asked if he was okay, and the boy confirmed he was, thanks to her. She continued, saying she would get straight to the point. By the authority of Vice Captain Agnesa Farid, she commanded him to join her team, but Nagi simply rejected the offer with ease. The Twilight Wind Guild was one of the most prestigious guilds in the West City, or at least it was supposed to be. After the guild leader went missing, the guild had begun to decay, and now, for the first time in a long while, a guild meeting was taking place. A purple-haired woman declared she was against it. No matter how desperate the guild's situation was, they still couldn't just accept anyone. Anne Dorothy asked what the others thought. Nine said he agreed with the rejection, as Agnesa was acting on her own authority. Furthermore, the guy was just a porter trying to play adventurer. Pororo asked if it was necessary to be so strict. She was actually in favor of recruiting him. Anne retorted that if Pororo was in favor, it must mean the protagonist was handsome. Pororo cried slander, claiming she only focused on healing him, even though his hair did look great. Stonemung told them to stop fighting. It was pointless, and Agnesa had already gone anyway. Anne questioned whose side he was on. Pororo added that they should reconsider, or Nagi might refuse her healing later. Stonemung didn't know what to do. Agnesa suddenly threw the door open, announcing there was no need to debate the matter further. They had already been rejected by Nagi. All the adventurers questioned this outcome, and Anne was shocked as well. Back in his room, Nagi packed his backpack. He wrapped fresh bandages around his hand and then tied back his hair. Finally, he announced that everything was ready. Petra asked if he was leaving already, suggesting it would be better to rest a while longer. However, Nagi replied that sitting around would only make him lazier. The inspector understood, but she still wanted to know why he rejected the guild's invitation when it offered so many benefits. Nagi agreed about the benefits, but joining meant being stuck with too many people who could cause all sorts of headaches. He preferred things the way they were, simple and familiar. Petra said if that was his preference, she wouldn't force him. Still, this was the second time he'd crossed paths with the Dawn Guild. It would be safer under Twilight Wind's protection. Nagi replied that she shouldn't worry. He had managed to escape unharmed both times, and that guild wouldn't bother with a mere porter anyway. Petra said in that case, she would head back to the association now. Nagi thanked her for everything. She told him if he needed anything, he should come see her. Nagi stood alone, his face neutral. Then he started to laugh. He said to himself he would check the rewards before leaving. He wondered what he had gotten. It had to be equipment or something valuable. He looked at his backpack, calling for Gula, wanting to know where she was hiding. He immediately bumped into Gula. He demanded to know why she hadn't come when called and what was up with her appearance, but Gula claimed it was nothing. Nagi asked if she had checked the chest and what kind of reward was inside, but Gula insisted there was nothing. Nagi noticed suspicious noises coming from the chest. He thought for a few seconds, then told Gula to move so he could check it himself. She tried to stop him, but Nagi flung the chest open. He wondered what kind of treasure hidden inside, only to be completely shocked when he opened the lid. "What is this?" Nagi demanded to know what these puppies, or baby creatures, were, and why they were inside his reward chest. He asked Gula what was going on, and what had happened to his reward. Gula replied that she hadn't done anything wrong. She was just organizing the chest like normal. When she opened the box to sort things, there were many egg-like stones inside. A tiny paw emerged from one of the eggs. Gula was enchanted by it, explaining that suddenly, these little ones just hatched. Nagi thought that if her story was true, they must be stone monsters. Someone with taming talent might buy them, but some had already hatched. Judging by their appearance, they didn't look like anything a professional tamer would want. This was a problem. He had used a ton of items in the dungeon and was counting on a real reward. He wondered what he should do with them. Gula pleaded that they were poor little beings. She heard their relatives were exploited by the serpent dragon, forced into slavery, and they were sealed in stones to save them. She wanted to keep them. She promised to take care of them. Nagi figured they might be useful, so he would keep them for now. It was only 3 small creatures. Nothing too bad could happen. He told Gula to be careful, warning that if even one of them messed up his backpack or destroyed anything, he was kicking them out. Gula called out to the children, happily announcing she got permission. They could all stay. Suddenly, hundreds of them appeared. Nagi was completely shocked, screaming, "There's more than 3?" He quickly retreated from his bag, declaring this an absolute chaotic mess. The Rift dungeon reward had been absolute crap, but at least he still had the loot from the cave dungeon. He had to deal with that now. Later, at an exchange shop, Nagi announced he was selling all the magic stones and monster items, receiving a hefty sack of coins in return. He remarked that it had been a long time since he held so much cash. First, he needed to replenish the stock he had used up. He needed smoke mushrooms and could finally stock up on explosives he couldn't afford before. Then, replenish his food supply, sharpen his weapons, restock his arrows, and also reward Nero and Van when he saw them next. Now, with the rest of the money, he was going to stuff himself with food. He walked down the street, practically skipping. High atop a building, someone watched him, wondering if that was really the guy, the one who caused so much trouble for the Dawn Guild. He thought it was just a rumor, but the guy really was a white rank. It was quite a feat for a mere white rank to throw some small fries into prison, but he had even managed to land a hit on Durakan. He asked Zero what he thought and if Nagi seemed strong. His shadow replied that if it happened twice, it wasn't a coincidence. Even a white rank could be dangerous. Knight agreed that was exactly the point. Normally, he didn't mess with white ranks, but if this guy really did something like that to his people, spinning his dagger on his finger, Need said he hoped the guy wouldn't disappoint him. He gathered his energy atop the roof, launching himself with explosive force. Nagi was skipping through the streets until the attack approached rapidly, coming right at his face. Nagi snapped his eyes in that direction. His popsicle stick was cut clean in 2. Nagi managed to dodge the blow, demanding to know who his attacker was. Need noted that even though he openly released his killing intent, the protagonist was already reacting to it, so he was sure Nagi wasn't an ordinary porter. He was intrigued now. Either way, this wasn't the end. He tried another cut with the dagger, but Nagi avoided another blow. Need told him to show what he had with the skills he used to mess with his guild. Nagi just laughed at that, wondering who the hell this guy was. His emblem identified him as a gold rank mage, yet he fought like an assassin. Thinking about such flagrant hostility, he couldn't just stand there doing nothing. He advanced while drawing his sword. Need questioned if he was ready to get serious now, because he was about to witness the swordsmanship he'd used to toy with Jeffnam. He was surprised to see the mushroom on the sword, an explosive type. Nagi used his secret porter ability and caused an immense explosion in the city. He then commented that only crazy guys fight adventurers head-on. The first thing he had to do was run far away, shouting that he was going to lose his life and that someone should save him. He warned the guards that there was a thief after him. A police officer questioned what was happening. Nagi said there was a bandit claiming to be an adventurer who tried to take his life. The guard recognized the man immediately, asking if it was Need from the Dawn Guild, while the guy said running was disappointing. Nagi thought about the Dawn Guild, and if this meant the retaliation Petra had spoken about, but still, no matter how angry they were, they wouldn't do something like this in the city. The guard asked Need for permission, wanting to ask what this was about. Nide repeated the question, then advanced quickly from his spot, saying it was a little discipline, ready to hit Nagi. He struck the protagonist's chest. Nagi hit the wall. Nide said from what he heard, this guy poisoned members of his guild with food and ruined their raid. A mere porter who dared to mess with the Dawn Guild. Everyone knows what happens when you mess with the Dawn Guild. Nagi shouted that it was a lie. It had been the adventurers from his guild who tried to kill him. He begged them to believe him. However, everyone just glared at Nagi. The protagonist said this was useless, thinking that, as Petra said, the Dawn Guild had considerable influence. In this situation, there was no one who would side with a white rank like him. Helping him benefited no one. In fact, it was better for them to side with the Dawn Guild, with people saying that some porters today are known for deceiving adventurers. The guard said he understood, and if that was the case, he would leave it for Need to decide the situation. Need just replied that he accepted that, questioning how the protagonist was doing, and if he still didn't understand that no one there would side with him. Nagi questioned why go so far since he knew the truth, that his guild was wrong, and with everything, he wanted to know, why take revenge right now? Need said he was right, and it wasn't the protagonist's fault since nobody cares about low-level disputes, even if they are guild members, but he messed with them. The Dawn Guild never lets even the slightest loss slide, and this was how they were going to make everyone remember that same feeling of fear. Anyone who messes with the Dawn Guild pays the price, and Nagi was just a tool to remind everyone of that fact. But he shouldn't worry because he wouldn't take his life. He carries the emblem of the last man he killed, and a white rank wasn't something to show off. So for today, he was going to mark him so that anyone who saw the scar on his face would remember today's events. He advanced against the protagonist using his twin daggers. He used the assassin talent, the 90-degree crosscut. Nagi watched the blow approach, scared, and when it was a hair's breadth from hitting him, his thought was that no one there would defend a porter, until the blow was deflected by a sword. Nagi wondered what that had been, but Agnesa remained in front of him now, warning Nade to lower his sword, because Nagi belongs to the Twilight Wind Guild, and right now, any attack on him will be considered a direct attack on them. Nade walked away with his hands in his pockets. His shadow began to move. Zero questioned if it was okay to leave things as they were, because it probably wasn't the result the guild wanted. Nade replied they had no choice, as facing Agnesa wasn't part of the plan. So even if he went ahead and fought her on his own, that wouldn't be a good choice because someone else already wants to fight her. Nade stopped spinning the dagger on his finger, saying that in the end, all that remained was a feeling of emptiness, because he was hoping Nagi would be something more. For a porter, he was definitely better than expected, but a porter is still a porter, another insignificant guy. So things ended abruptly, but after what happened, he'll be too scared to do anything. Zero agreed, but suddenly, a cut appeared on Need's face, bleeding slightly. Need questioned when this happened and if Agnesa had hit him. His shadow questioned if he hadn't noticed. In that case, then slowly, he must retrace his steps, one by one, place his hands on his face from the moment he found him, until the moment he thought he had finished with him, the exact moment he believed it was all over, and that the protagonist had already given up. But Nagi never did that. He was waiting for a chance, moving his fist and drawing a small dagger. Zero explained that even in that situation, Nagi used the fact that Need was coming from above to slip the dagger into his sleeve. Nagi thought that since no one in the world would side with a porter, then he would protect himself. Throwing the dagger, that weapon went through the strike, grazing Need's face. Zero questioned how many times he had already told him. When he thinks his enemy is defeated, he lowers his guard, exposing a flaw and worsening his vision. Need licked the blood, saying that this had been very interesting. He wondered if he would have to take back what he said about him being disheartening, and Zero said he would personally deal with Nagi again. Back at the scene, Nagi tucked the dagger back into his sleeve, thinking he prepared this in case he couldn't get the equipment from his backpack, but he still didn't have enough firepower to defeat an adventurer. If Agnesa hadn't helped him, he probably would have been in real danger. He wanted to know who this guy called Need was, and if the Dawn Guild really sent an adventurer of that caliber just for simple revenge. Honestly, he didn't want to cross paths with him again. Nine placed a hand on his shoulder, questioning what he was thinking about so deeply. He must be scared. Stonemung said it was probably just scary memories. Nine continued that Need is notorious even within the Dawn Guild, because they control the assassin gang that even the guards ignore. Nagi said he heard a little about the Dawn Guild, but didn't realize they would do this, attacking someone in the middle of the city. Agnesa spoke that this was exactly what she imagined. It would be safer in a dungeon than staying in the city, and that's why they brought him. Just as she mentioned before, she wants to know why he doesn't join the guild at least for the duration of the dungeon raids. Nagi says he just has to keep doing his activities. But anyway, he was starting to feel cold. It was his first time seeing a high-level dungeon, this one being the cemetery. The cemetery dungeon was rank B. Nine laughed, asking if he was scared of that. Dungeons like these were easy for them, so he should believe in him and focus on collecting items while following his lead. Nagi thought he wasn't wrong. They were with gold and silver rank adventurers, besides Agnesa, who was at mithril rank. Having someone like that in the raid group meant it was practically done. His only worry was that normally in rank B or higher dungeons, It was crucial to assemble a team with balanced skills, but in this case, everyone is a warrior type. When a team leans so heavily to one side, it becomes harder to deal with unexpected situations. Agnesa took another step and ordered the group to stop. It seemed they were about to start the welcome party, with skeletons rising from the ground. The soldiers stared coldly at the group. Agnesa just released her flaming sword, engaging it in an advancing stance. Then she warned her team that she was going to clear the path, cleaving all the skeletons with a single blow. Agnesa looked back as her fire manifested. Get ready for another cut. She takes down another horde of monsters with ease. She keeps pushing forward, unleashing a wheel of fire across the area. The skeletons are incinerated on impact, but then the horde parts ways. A giant zombie skeleton is revealed, just standing there. The monster locks eyes with the protagonist group and roars. Nagi comments that it's a genuine B-rank monster. They were facing something at this level right at the start. The zombie is gripping a massive chunk of concrete. It smashes it into the ground, forcing Agnesa to dodge. The monster moves again. Agnesa evades its strikes with mid-air acrobatics. She uses the cave ceiling to push off, activating her magic swordsman talent, Ignition. Her charging slash cuts the monster's neck, hitting its back and shattering it into pieces. Agnesa continues her fiery dance. The B-rank monster shrieks in pain. She activates her magic swordsman talent, Blooming Flowers. A lotus manifests amidst the flames, completely exploding the monster as Agnesa lands in front of it. The rest of the group just watches. They were enjoying the show. Nagi realizes his intel on the group was redundant. He'd seen many adventurers, but never a talent this powerful. Talent is essential for adventurers. It's how they wield their class's special abilities. Capacities vary wildly. The reason adventurers can face powerful monsters, especially at mithril rank, is because they hone their talents beyond normal comprehension. Agnesa says there's no time to hesitate. They need to move fast before those things resurrect. The group keeps running forward. Resurrection is the key difference between cemetery dungeons and others. Cemetery monsters are considered weaker than others of similar rank, but the difficulty is that they keep reviving, no matter how many times you kill them. Defeated monsters gradually respawn and pursue you. If progress is slow, you can easily get trapped on both sides. When that happens, the chances of clearing the dungeon drop drastically. That's why having a priest on the team to eradicate them permanently or using holy water is essential. The problem is, both are expensive. The monsters are closing in. Agnesa announces the zombies have caught up. Nine suggests they should have brought Pororo. There's a priest who is a permanent resident at the guild. She's a demon in disguise, always demanding gold for everything. She asked for an absurd amount to join this expedition. He wonders if the guild is so poor they can't even afford someone like her. Agnesa tells him to save the excuses for later. She'll handle the enemies in front, and Stonemung needs to delay their advance. As for Nines, his role is to stay in the back, watch, and maybe cheer for them. Nagi asks if the knight isn't going to fight. Nines tries to explain. His chosen weapon was left behind at the guild. Nagi asks if he forgot his weapon. Nines claims they left in a hurry, so accidents happen. Agnesa retorts that accidents happen a lot with him. He's always forgetting things. Stonemung adds that he remembers when Nines showed up to a dungeon without armor. Nagi says it's fine. He brought plenty of equipment. He asks what kind of sword Nines prefers. Nines says a long sword or a bastard sword, but Nines doesn't decide. He grabs the protagonist's shoulder and headbutts him, calling him an idiot. Nagi asks what he's doing. Nines tells him to listen closely. He only fights with his sword. Elisabette Robest, that is the path of a knight. Nagi stares at him for a few seconds, wondering what's wrong with this weirdo, but Stonemung tells them to wait. Something is up with the monsters trailing them. There are fewer than expected, and they're moving slower than normal. Agnesa realizes why. The zombies' feet are covered in thorns and glue. She asks about the tax. Nagi says it's nothing special, since the monsters will resurrect anyway. The most dangerous part of this dungeon is getting trapped by respawned monsters, even if you can defeat them again. This is his scout trap ability using stable, sticky tacks. He explains that's why he's been dropping them as they move. He thought it was a crucial weapon, even if it hasn't helped that much. Stonemung and Agnesa declare that he is definitely much more useful than Nines, shocking the knight. The group keeps pushing forward as fast as they can, wondering how many times these things will revive. Nine says if he just had his weapon, these guys would be nothing. Agnesa says they need to escape before getting surrounded. They spot the end of the cave. Agnesa yells that it's Stonemung's turn. The bear indicates he understands, activating his tank talent, Stone Shield. It rises from the ground, covered in spikes. The zombies slam into the barrier, trapped by the shield's path. Stonemung says it's ready, but it won't hold for long. They need to escape quickly. They are surprised to arrive at an underground lake zone. Nines wonders what kind of dungeon blocks the path with a giant lake. Nagi points out that at least a boat has been prepared for them. Nines jokes that it's very considerate of the dungeon. Anyway, they have to move. It seems there's no choice but to use the boat. Stonemung warns the zombies will catch up soon. Nines finds it strange that this small boat can hold the weight of their armor. Agnesa retorts that since he doesn't even fight, he should swim. Nagi suggests it's better if they take them off. Mr. Nines and Mr. Stonemung should put their armor over there. Both sets of armor are left on the ground. The two warriors prepare for the boat. Agnesa watches from a distance, then gets shocked and lets out a scream. She wants to know how much Nines is planning to take off. The knight insists it reduces weight. The boat departs with the group aboard. Nines bursts out laughing, pointing out that Agnesa screamed. Even a mithril rank gets flustered, apparently. A few minutes later, he raises his hands in apology, his face bruised. He promises to wear more appropriate clothes next time. Agnesa says it wouldn't be so bad if he hadn't forgotten his weapon, since now he's completely useless. Nines argues that she knows if he had his weapon, he could clear the dungeon alone. Agnesa says that's exactly the problem. What good is his weapon if he doesn't keep it with him? Nagi thinks about this knight's path. Adventurers with this talent create a code to embody their beliefs. The code establishes an absolute rule they must follow, but in exchange, they gain immense power. Nines established a code where he cannot fight with any equipment other than his sword. It's a rule he must obey, and in return, his weapon is legendary. Nagi asks if that isn't considered a weakness, which is why most people keep their codes secret. Agnesa agrees, but this guy talks too much. There's no one in the city who doesn't know his code. Nines argues that even if they know, his sword is invincible. Agnesa comments that Nines has always been an idiot, so she'll let it slide. Anyway, she heard about his backpack. It's amazing, since whatever goes inside completely disappears. Nagi explains that the weight doesn't disappear. The moment you put something inside, it gets massive size reduction. Even with their armor inside, it weighs less than a crystal. Stonemung says that's much more impressive than Nines' sword, especially since the special food they ate earlier was absolutely perfect. Nines agrees, commenting that even Agnesa was busy eating bread while defeating zombies. Agnesa retorts that she has no time to eat, while he was just stretching during the hunt. Nagi tells the group to wait a second. It's about to start. Agnesa gapes in shock. Several boats are surrounding them. Small skeletons prepare to attack. This is their enemy. Nagi says it really is a trap to drown adventurers. Agnesa agrees. Fighting here puts them at a severe disadvantage. Nines asks why they got on if they knew it was a trap. The girl confirms his suspicion. It is a dungeon after all. There's no way they would place a boat just to help adventurers. Besides, they had no choice. She thinks the problem is worse than they expected. There are too many enemies, and now she is the only one who can fight. Even if she tries to intercept them, their boat will be riddled with arrows first. Nagi tells them to leave it to him. Fighting on the water is too cumbersome. They need to move fast and smash through instead. Agnesa asks if the backpack can really help them break through. Nagi confirms it can, but warns everyone to hold on tight. They are all stunned. Nagi unleashes his air compression technique. He injects the air, using it to boost the boat forward. The compressed blast propels the group ahead. Agnesa asks if it was wind magic. Nagi denies it, saying there was no magic involved. It was just compressed air being released. He discovered it when he left the backpack out on a very windy day. He found he could capture and store the wind inside its dimensional space. Releasing it all at once causes this effect. The zombie skeleton readies an arrow. It fires rapidly at the adventuring party. Nagi pulls a rope from his bag. He spins the rope as the boat speeds onward. The skeletons start to stagger. Agnesa yells to wait a moment and asks if he looked ahead. They block the entrance with a wooden barrier. These zombies laid such a meticulous trap against the group. Agnesa prepares herself, saying she'll break it somehow. Nagi tells her to wait. They've done enough for now. He'll help her. Fire and wind have good synergy. Agnesa understands and moves her sword. Nagi prepares to release the compressed wind. The connected technique was the Crimson Fang heat wave. The whirlwind closes in rapidly on the zombies. They are caught by surprise. Their barrier slowly begins to break. Then it explodes right there. The fire reaches the wood. Agnesa stands firm with her sword as the group advances. Minutes later, the boat is disassembled. Nagi asks if everyone is okay. They barely made it in time. Agnesa says the place beyond here looks like where the dungeon boss is. A fortress inside an underground tomb is grand scale. Nine says no matter how he looks at it, this is too hard for a B-rank dungeon. Stonemung agrees. Any normal group would have failed. The knight wonders why their guild always picks dungeons like this. Wouldn't it be easier to go for ones with good rewards? Agnesa says it's their job. Stonemung says it must be tough for his first dungeon, but the guild takes dungeons no one else clears. Nagi says it doesn't matter since it's their job now. Agnesa states that even if it's a B rank, they can't lower their guard. There are always problematic bosses, and at least he keeps moving in front of her. That boss boss had its eyes closed, but opens them saying they were very bold to set foot in his paradise. It's a lich. Nines questions it being a lich and calls it bad luck. Stonemung says it's his first time seeing one appear. Agnesa reflects that they are magic category monsters and always have unpredictable factors. She has already used a lot of energy fighting alone until now, so she triggers her sword's ignition. She has to defeat him before anything unpredictable happens. She advances rapidly with her sword toward the lich. Most zombie monsters are fools that blindly attack their prey, but the lich was different. As a being that knows it is devoid of life, it started analyzing Agnesa's movements and intentions. It quickly realized she was charging ahead to protect her allies behind her, and found an answer fast. Agnesa slashes, but the throne was empty. She wonders if the monster vanished, but the lich reappears with its traits, using warp magic. Then it calls the group foolish beings, telling them to become its servants. Nagi just gets scared by the power, but Agnesa orders them out of the way, taking the brunt of the magic herself. Nagi thinks they might be facing the worst possible scenario in this dungeon. Agnesa had become their enemy via the lich's magic. Nines tells Stone to grab Nagi and run. The two question him. No matter how strong he is, he can't stop Agnesa. They need to run, but Nines just repeats it, asking what they were talking about. A knight never turns his back on the enemy, even though he has to admit this looks pretty cool, saying that no matter how strong Agnesa is, she already burned a lot of her strength. She handled the whole dungeon alone. No surprise there. At this point, he can probably handle her. Agnesa activates an even stronger ignition, charging with a blast of fire. Nines tries to hold his stance, but is completely shocked by it, screaming while retreating in fear of the blows. He wonders what the hell this was. How does she still have so much strength? Dodging the blows with extreme difficulty. Agnesa advances on him again. Nines repeats that a knight never turns his back. He gets up from the ground one more time, only this time, he's running backward. Stonemung and Nagi had exited the castle. Both approach the coast, but Nines asks them to wait for him. Nagi questions if he wasn't going to fight her. Nines says he was joking. There's no way to stop Agnesa. Stonemung replies honestly that he didn't expect much from him since he turned into zombies many times. Nagi stops the group and tells them to look ahead. Down below, it was full of boats. The zombies had already reached land. They were completely surrounded by enemies. There are too many of them. It's bad because outside, there are zombies. And inside the fortress, they have Agnesa, who remains standing facing the group. Stonemung says he'll buy some time for them. Slamming his fist on the ground with his shielder talent, stone seals begin to rise, creating a barrier that traps Agnesa. The girl just observes this, finding an opening amid the stones. She jumps as high as she can, using the stone seals as stepping stones, advancing to the place she desires. Stonemung says, as expected of Agnesa, she was so fast he couldn't even land a hit. She is closing in on his ally. Nagi is able to think for a fraction of a second. There must be something that just for a moment helps stop Agnesa's attacks, but it has to be good. A trick won't work twice on her, so he puts his hand in his backpack, throwing something, thinking it would work. Agnesa charges until the launched food nears her. The girl turns her eyes aside, seeing the porter's food capture technique. She jumps on the stones to grab the donut, thinking the bread had been captured. Nagi says he did it. It seemed she was under control, but still following her basic instincts. Nines laughs. The protagonist says they wouldn't hold out like this much longer. They need to find a place to hide in the fortress. Inside, Nagi breathes heavily, commenting that she didn't seem to be following them now, but at the same time, the zombies were climbing the cliff. They were trying to regroup inside the fortress, so they need a plan. Nines says it won't be easy. Agnesa was receiving help from the lich. She should have been out of ether after clearing the dungeon alone, but since she was feeding on the lich's power, the flames turned black. If it weren't for that, he would have defeated her. Anyway, he wants to know what this place is. Judging by the weapons in the glass, it seems to be some kind of armory. Nagi denies it. It doesn't look like zombie equipment. If he had to say, this place looks more like a trophy room. The two question this. Nagi says intelligent monsters like liches sometimes collect fallen adventurers' belongings as trophies. That's probably it, thinking the dungeon structure was very difficult compared to its level. And with a lich as a boss, it's not surprising other groups have fallen here. But there's something he doesn't understand. Why are there children's toys and objects that don't belong to adventurers mixed in? Stonemung says he heard a story once. As mentioned before, they usually go to dungeons that are avoided. When this dungeon appeared, it was notorious for repeated failures. But strangely, after that, people in the village started disappearing. They didn't notice anything unusual while exploring the dungeon. Nagi says it was a kidnapping dungeon. That means the monsters leave the dungeon and kidnap civilians. Nines repeats the concept, saying it hadn't been a dungeon break. He thought the monsters monsters were trapped inside. Nagi says it was just a theory since kidnapping dungeons were very rare. Normally, monsters can't leave their dungeons because the energy field outside can't draw out their full strength. They only leave when something abnormal happens, like a dungeon break. Nine says he has something to confirm regarding that. They need to defeat this lich and find out for themselves. They have no other choice. He will defeat the lich, because a knight cannot stand idly by in the face of injustice. He asks where the other two were looking, but they say it was nothing. Nines declares that this time he'll do it right. He ties a blindfold over his eyes. From this moment on, he is denying his knightly vow and drawing his sword. Nagi warns that this must have serious consequences and asks if he's sure about it. Nines asks who knows. It was a personal vow, not an external force. Regardless, if he can land one solid hit on the lich, he might at least break its control over Agnisa. Stone Mung asks what they should do to get him in front of the lich. Nagi asks if he can really pull this off. If they guide him to the lich, can he take it down? Nines says that's the wrong question. If the theory is correct, there's nothing else they can do. It is something he is obligated to fulfill. Nagi agrees. He will act as Nine's eyes to guide him to the boss. Stone Mung questions the plan, noting they are already up against an entire army. To defeat the lich, they have to get past Agnisa and push through the whole horde. Nagi replies that he's right. To break the enemy army, they are going to need an army of their own. In the lich's chamber, Agnisa and all the zombies stand aligned. One zombie salutes its king, speaking in its tongue about something important. The lich comments that it seems the rats are coming to fight. They must capture them all, even take an arm or two if necessary. The zombies advance against the protagonist group. Nagi warns that they are coming and tells everyone to get behind him. Suddenly, the zombies trip on a tripwire. This causes an immense explosion of smoke, which billows towards the group. Nine says he can smell something delicious. Nagi asks if Gula is ready. She asks him to wait a moment, wanting to know if he's sure this will work. Nagi tells her not to worry. He will be aiming. She just needs to pull the trigger. A zombie appears through the smoke, dissipating everything in its path. Nagi opens his backpack slightly. Inside, one of the puppies holds a crossbow. He releases his entire army from within. Gula says it's time for them to prepare and then fire at the group. Nagi uses his secret technique, Porter Dog Machine Gun. Tens of thousands of arrows are fired against the skeleton army. Nines asks what is happening. The arrows continue firing non-stop. Nagi says they are just going to pass through to the boss room. Meanwhile, in a walled city inside the Adventurers Association, various people gather in the guild. A girl looks at her colleague, asking what Petra has been writing these days. She's been acting strange since returning from the Rift Dungeon, and the girl wants to know if she's writing research paper or something. Petra denies it. It was just a question on her mind, and she wanted to organize her thoughts. She was wondering if one really needs a combat-related talent to be an adventurer. The girl asks what kind of obvious question that is. It's clear. If you don't have a combat talent, you won't be one. Otherwise, why would people go so far to obtain one? She doesn't need to explain. Petra just needs to look over there. A man yells not to mess with him. Something says his talent is tailor. The man insists there's no way that's his talent and demands to do it again. He needs to become an adventurer, but the crystal ball says he cannot. The girl says she sees people like this many times a day. The chance of awakening with an adventurer talent is very low. Petra reflects that their life paths are determined so early. Every person who passes through the class ceremony at the guild is supposed to awaken their innate talent. The process analyzes the ether in their body and displays their talent written in the form of magical equipment. As a result, the rules for adventurers are extreme. Some people say it's better to discover your natural talent early so you can follow it. She admits she thought that way too. Her colleague says she still doesn't understand why people are so desperate to become adventurers. Even offering a chance at money or status, it's a dangerous and cruel path. They were lucky to get government jobs with salaries on par with average adventurers, but without the danger. Life was easy. Petra writes that even after what happened and meeting Nagi, she started asking herself something about a person's future. Furthermore, can dreams really be determined by the talents you are born with? Back in the dungeon, facing all the zombies being hit by arrows, Nagi's backpack keeps firing. He tells everyone to stay close. They might have overwhelmed the numbers, but each arrow was crudely made. The zombies will recover and advance once more. Nines asks if they are doing well. He can't see anything, so he has no idea what happened. Stonemung tells him not to worry. Nagi is incredible. He heard Nagi led a Rift Dungeon expedition, and the rumors weren't exaggerated. Nagi warns that they are near the boss room now. This is when the game truly begins. The zombies stand before the lich. The group notes that, as expected, with so many enemies, it will be hard to reach the boss. But Nagi has a plan. He reminds them that the lich dodged Agnisa's attack with a teleport, This means they can defeat it with a surprise attack before it reacts. Nines says that's no problem. He'll end it with one blow. Nagi tells him to wait. Speaking like that will let the enemies hear them. Nagi thinks that to reach his target, he must cross the zombie soldiers blocking his path. But they aren't fighting them anymore. He doesn't need to fight everyone anyway. He fires an arrow tipped with an explosive mushroom. However, it approaches the chandelier, getting close to its lamp. Nagi thinks all they need is to change their perception. Zombie creatures by nature rely much more on their sense of smell than sight. According to the renowned book on zombies, Ghost Walk, there was a man who explored by covering himself in zombie corpses to pass through an entire army. They don't have any bodies to use right now, but luckily, his backpack absorbs the scent of the location the entire time. Nines asks what that horrible smell is. Nagi tells him just to endure it for a bit, because they won't recognize them. They are moving straight toward the lich. The zombies continue walking right past them. Stone Mung pretends he is a zombie and is hungry. The group successfully crosses through the zombies. The lich asks if they were trying to pass with such a stupid trick. They are idiotic little rats. It wants to know if they think these tactics will work on them. It uses fire hole magic. The zombies are dazzled by it. The lich wonders where the rats are hiding, then turns around. Stone Mung slams his fist on the ground. A stone wall rises up. Nagi climbs atop the wall, warning Nines that the lich is right in front. Nines mentions those lovely things, and then gets pushed. Nagi warns that Agnesa is there. He's going to use bread to divert her attention. They will only get one shot at this, and Nines understands. He grips his giant sword tightly. He will end this with his single strike using the night talent. The lich begins to use its teleport, but Nines declares it isn't going anywhere. He cuts through even the magic, intending to split it in half. However, his face is struck by a shoe. Agnesa kicks the boy away. They wonder how that happened. Did Agnesa not eat the bread? There was no way that should have happened, unless Agnesa was full. Stone Mung notes she has eaten a lot up until now. Nagi says it's not too late and Nines needs to try one more time. The knight begins to scream with his energy. A soul forms around him, stating that the knight broke his knightly path and brought dishonor. Therefore, it will deliver judgment, judging Nines with chains. Nagi tries to call out to his friend, telling him to dodge because the knights are coming. Stone Mung said he'd hold them off for now, blocking the way with a stone wall. The zombies started climbing. Nagi climbed down the rock toward his friends. Stone Mung told them he couldn't keep the wall up for even 5 more minutes. His ether was fading fast. They needed a plan. Back at the Adventurers Guild, the blue-haired girl explained that ether was the reason. Like Petra said, there are untalented people who want to be adventurers, but the decisive difference between them was ether. Only combat-related talents could accumulate and refine ether in their bodies. Low-level monsters could be handled by normal people with regular training, but against high rankers or the dungeon bosses found in everyone. Without ether, defeating them was simply impossible, so she wondered how they could ever become adventurers. Meanwhile, Nagi stood before the lich. An explosion ripped through the area. Someone yelled to hold them back and told the protagonist to run. Nagi said he couldn't do that. Nines replied that it was an adventurer's duty. They failed the subjugation, so it was their responsibility. The lich commented that this was pathetic. He wondered if they thought he'd let a single rat escape after sneaking into his palace. The adventurers cursed him as the magic moved, striking the group moments later. Nines and Stone Mung screamed in pain. The lich just floated there, facing them. He declared they weren't even worthy of being entertainment. They were no better than insignificant worms, unworthy of facing him directly. So, he hoped to enjoy himself another way, the sight of former comrades taking each other's lives. It was one of the most beautiful things to see. Agnesa stepped forward. The fire attack approached the protagonist. He watched it, slightly terrified. In the Adventurers Guild library, Petra was studying. She analyzed a book discussing how a talentless man could become an adventurer. Her colleague appeared, surprised to find Petra there. She wanted to know why Petra was so obsessed with this, digging through old books. She thought she'd explained clearly. Without talent and ether, you can't become an adventurer. Petra said she agreed and used to think the same way. But recently, she met someone who made her question it. She asked if Rasha knew how many dungeons porters normally participated in per year. Rasha said if they worked hard, maybe 2 or 3 times a week max. So, about 100. Petra confirmed that normally it was about 100, sometimes 150, but according to guild records, there was one porter with nearly 300 subjugations a year. Rasha asked what kind of person that could be and if they ever rested. For a porter to be that obsessed with dungeons, they must either be completely addicted to money or harbor an absurd hatred for dungeons. Nagi defended against Agnesa's strike with his sword. The fire attack closed in. The sword began to fragment from the heat, snapping in two with Nagi's deflection. He thought that if he was going to face her, he couldn't let a single strike through. It It was more than just the difference in equipment quality. There was a real difference between Agnesa and him. He made another defense. Another of Nagi's swords broke, so he pulled a shield from his pack. He stood firm. He thought that he only had one advantage. When adventurers are clearing a dungeon, the porter has nothing to do. The only thing they can do is watch the adventurers fight, and that's what he knew, from Agnesa's swordsmanship to her habits. Every strike of hers began with an ignition at the sheath, followed by her sword technique. But even knowing that, the attack happened in an instant. Just reacting wasn't enough. Agnesa prepared an attack, raising her weapon above her head. Nagi reflected that the time between hits was 2 milliseconds. If he waited to see the movement before dodging, it would be too late. He dodged 2 of her strikes. He knew he had to nail his next move, anticipate the flow of her swordsmanship, and move before she attacked. Even so, she was faster than he expected. He needed to act in at least half that time. He wondered if this was the limit of his reaction speed. Nagi reflected that with this sense, he should be grateful to Durakan. After taking a hit from him, he had felt the speed of a mithril rank strike, but that was absolutely everything he had. If he stayed defensive, the situation wouldn't change. There were only 2 ways to break this stalemate. One was to defeat the Lich casting the domination spell. The other was to land a powerful blow on Agnesa and snap her out of it. Now the latter was his only option, even if he could land just a single hit on her. First the axe, since normal swords broke the moment they made contact, but if it was an axe like this, it would be rejected or invalidated, broken and thrown aside. Nagi realized the weapon didn't matter. Against the flame-infused Agnesa, it was sliced like tofu. He wondered about the spear. Maybe he could take advantage of its reach. However, the flames moved again. That attack was rejected and invalidated once more. The protagonist reflected that against magic that breathed like a dragon's blast, reach was meaningless. All that remained was to keep trying until something worked. He yelled for Gula to dump all the equipment from the backpack. All his weapons were thrown high into the air. Nagi advanced, meanwhile, holding 2 swords. He moved his fists at incredible speed, deflecting another strike from Agnesa. The sword broke again. Nagi stopped behind her, grabbing a long sword stuck in the ground. He deflected another blow with extreme ease. However, the wheel of fire moved. Even though he could move, some of his weapons were snapped in half. Nagi moved quickly with a dagger in hand, striking her sword once more. Little by little, the fire weapon began to break. Nagi realized her equipment was also sustaining heavy damage from the temperature. He just had to hold on a little longer. Nagi grabbed 2 more swords. He thought, just a little more. He attempted another flurry of strikes, attacking Agnesa without giving her time to rest, constantly deflecting her blows. They stared coldly at each other as another volley occurred. Their battle was like a swordsman's dance, with weapons breaking at every turn. Agnesa prepared her sword once again. She used fire flower. Nagi emerged from her attack completely burned. He thought this was his limit. Then, Agnesa's sword broke. The girl advanced with another kick. Nagi thought his body had given up first as he was thrown into the air. He screamed in pain. The Lich watched the battle, laughing. He commented that this was amusing, an unexpected source of fun. Until now, the adventurers who came here were nothing but trash. But Nagi was worthy of his dungeon. He should surrender his strength. If he did, the dungeon would expand beyond this place and devour the entire kingdom. Thanks to Nagi, his dungeon would grow stronger. He thanked him, for he would rebuild his empire. Swords continued to fall to the ground. Nagi remained kneeling there, his body drained of strength. He said a monster planning to invade the world was dangerous, so he couldn't let him escape. All monsters had to lose their lives along with the dungeon. He asked how many weapons were left. Gula replied there was only one. Nagi drew the final sword, saying it was just one chance. He wondered what he should do, but he just closed his eyes, thinking there was no other way. Facing extreme crisis, Nagi lost consciousness for a brief moment. In a dreamlike state, he returned to the reason for his dungeon obsession. On the day he lost everything, Nagi made a vow to destroy the dungeons, but it wasn't something a mere porter could do. A man had told him to give up, yet looking at him it didn't seem like he would give up. As he knew, someone without talent couldn't become an adventurer. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Adventurers exist to defeat monsters. So, he questioned what happens if someone strong enough to defeat an adventurer appears. It wouldn't be easy, but it wasn't impossible. If he trained for a while, there might be a way. For him to master the technique of a single sword, learning a little of everything would never get him to an adventurer's level. Instead, he would improve just one thing, a sword strike containing all his power. If he could maintain that, his single blow would be capable of reaching the level of an adventurer. From then on, Nagi trained endlessly in a strike that held all his strength. No matter how hard he trained, nothing ever changed. It was like facing an insurmountable wall he'd never cross. Yet, he never stopped training. Maybe that was why. Even while unconscious, his body reacted on instinct, a posture honed by years of practice. It all started with the sword leaving its sheath. Nagi didn't have a sheath, so he used his backpack instead. The lich screams for them to rejoice, claiming it will grant them immortality so they should cast aside their fragile bodies. Agnesa charges forward with a fiery strike. Someone without talent could never become an adventurer. Their ether couldn't be improved. They couldn't cut a monster. But then, the sword is drawn, glowing with blue energy. Nagi thinks, it's not up to me to decide that. He strikes with everything he has. Agnesa's sword snaps in two. The strike closes in on the lich, closer and closer. The monster slowly closes its eyes. The battle scene, once amusing to it, spins wildly in reverse, because now, its body is missing its head. On that day, Nagi didn't know what he had done, but the blade that landed that blow was the one that bridged the abyss between adventurers and the talentless. And in the years to come, his swordsmanship would be remembered by this name. The swordsmanship that surpasses all limits. The Azrahan quick draw. Dungeons kept expanding without stopping. At that rapid pace, humanity's power couldn't stop them anymore. With the endless appearance of dungeons, the kingdoms of the world neared destruction. But then, humans awakened ether in response to the growing threat. Under the name of adventurers, they began conquering dungeons. Some say this distinction wasn't discrimination but protection. Rasha mentions that back in those days, there were people who couldn't accept reality and entered dungeons to hunt without the talent of an adventurer. You wonder what she thinks happened. They all lost their lives. Remembering that, separating people by talent might seem cruel, but it was a system designed to protect those who couldn't become adventurers. Petra thinks that was true, but perhaps it wasn't the most logical or real perspective. But on the day the dungeon break occurred in the rift, when Agnesa arrived at the scene, she saw the way Nagi looked at her. It was as if his eyes were saying that he too wanted to be an adventurer. So, hoping that talent wasn't the only thing defining adventurers, she leaves those words behind. Back at the Lich's fortress, Agnesa wakes up, wondering how Nagi managed that with a single blow. The protagonist says it's not over yet, and this thing is still alive. The Lich screams that he's a bastard for daring to lay a hand on its body. Liches are quite troublesome monsters. Besides being magical, they possess absurdly persistent life force thanks to their life vessel. Unless they are broken, they can revive endlessly. Nagi thinks he needs to move his sword again, but his body feels the impact of the pain. He collapses to the ground, thinking his body won't move anymore. Agnesa shouts for Nagi to rest. She'll correct her error. The Lich prepares another spell, telling the human to come. Agnesa dodges the attacks with ease. She thinks there are two ways to end a Lich. One was to find and destroy its life source, or continue attacking until its life force is exhausted. The Lich screams that the attacks were useless because it is immortal. Agnesa approaches, questioning if that was it, because it flooded its body with mana for control, but that was no different than exposing its own weaknesses. Through the flow of mana, she was able to see its life source, seeing that it was the throne. The Lich yells for that crazy woman not to attack, but Agnesa prepares her ignition mid-air. She charges and cuts the throne in half. The Lich is left slack-jawed at the sight, but it begins to be destroyed. It denies it, its dream being shattered so suddenly. Agnesa keeps moving her sword forward, facing the throne. She questions if Nagi is okay and what sword technique that had been. The protagonist sits on the floor asking who knows about that. He has no idea. He just thought he needed to stop her somehow, and things just worked out like that. Either way, he was just happy everything ended thanks to Agnesa. The girl says he doesn't have to be proud of that. He just brought injuries to everyone. Thinking that even under the Lich's control, she remembers everything clearly. Even though he wasn't moving on his own, Nagi fought on the same level as her, but the difference was overwhelming. And yet, he managed to cut the Lich behind her with that sword technique. She wondered what that was because it had been absurd. Even now, she knows this wasn't just his strength, but more importantly, it was his will to fight an opponent he knew he'd never beat. The guild leader tells Agnesa to remember this. In that world, they don't need adventurers with great power, but adventurers with great will. One day, she will understand and find someone like that. Someone who, amidst the crisis of disaster, still holds an inexplicable power to push through alone, unlike those who aim for personal gain through their strength. That was a true adventurer, and that was the reason why she, as vice captain of Twilight Wind, had to make sure this person joined. So, Agnesa says she's going to ask one more time. Her guild, Twilight Wind wasn't like normal guilds aiming for money or fame. They exist to eradicate dungeons and prevent dungeon breaks. Because of that, they end up taking on more dangerous dungeons that bring no benefit, only difficulty. That was why her guild doesn't want those with great strength, but those with great will. Just like Nagi, who risked everything to clear the Rift dungeon without personal gain, all to prevent a break. Then she extends her hand to him, questioning if he wants to join her guild because they need him. Nagi looks at her hand, thinking that it was a guild dedicated to preventing dungeon breaks. He had already wished for something like this but never found one. If he had, that tragedy wouldn't have happened. A merchant calls out to the protagonist saying he was there, but he was too late in that case, because the village had already been burned down. Bodies were lying lifeless on the ground. Nagi could only cry, thinking that this was what he wanted to change. Perhaps this is what he needs to do, saying that if she is serious about this, then he would give it a chance to stop the breaks. Agnesa welcomes Nagi, now as a member of Twilight Wind. Stone Mung sleeps on the floor thanks to the Lich's magic, but he wakes up suddenly, getting scared by the scene of the battle, wanting to know about the Lich and what happened to Agnesa. But he begins to process the situation after seeing the two of them. Then he says she broke the control magic on her own and defeated the Lich. Incredible, as expected. But Agnesa says she'll explain later. Besides, Nines hadn't even done anything. She wants to know how long he's going to sleep, ordering him to wake up immediately after. Nines wakes up scared and calls for his vice leader, but he tells her to wait and grabs her, giving her a headbutt because he was going to release her from the control of the magic now. He questions if Nagi saw that because he saved Agnesa and didn't even need his sword to shine. Agnesa gets even more irritated, saying that she really is going to take this bastard's life. Nines questions what was wrong, and in this way, they cleared the cemetery dungeon and the gate was closed. Nines says he was the one who went through that hell, and Agnesa says the dungeon is over. But their work isn't yet. The items recovered from the cemetery dungeon. Normally, the association sends people to return them to their owners. But since the dungeon was far away, the chance of that happening was low, so they did it themselves. In a bed, a woman puts a pot on the fire, preparing a stew that looked delicious. The mother prepares the food with dedication, placing it inside a bowl. She and her husband sit down to eat with a bowl of food at their side, but that one had no owner for now. Nagi knocks on their door. Both are surprised to have a visitor at this hour, but the protagonist was holding the teddy bear. The mother starts to cry at that, kneeling on the floor for having lost her daughter. This was certainly more difficult than cleaning the dungeon, but it was still something that must be done. The group comments that they returned the belongings that belonged to the villagers. The association would be able to track the owners of the adventurers who wore guild necklaces. Agnesa says he must be thinking hard, but her guild believes this is part of an adventurer's duty. Nagi denies it. He doesn't think that's it at all. The victim's family he met cooked an extra meal every dinner because they never knew when their loved one would return. He doesn't think giving them this was right, even if it's the truth. They would lose hope, but Agnesa insists it was best. It will be painful now, but they won't be trapped forever. She's sure it was for the best. Nagi is left speechless. Nine says he still doesn't get why that damn Lich went so far to kidnap civilians. Agnesa asks who knows. There's an old rumor that dungeons get stronger the more lives they take. If it's the cemetery one, maybe that's it. But like Nine said, nothing makes sense. He saw the Lich's final moments with his own eyes. It was crying. He clearly heard it apologize to the creator. That name isn't something a non-adventurer should speak. This dungeon was full of irregularities. She continues, saying she doesn't know why people were kidnapped, but before anything else, they need to clear dungeons first. That's why they exist. After completing the hunt, they returned to the city a week later. Then Nagi found something shocking. Nero is begging, asking him to just spare a coin. Nagi asks what the hell happened here. He realizes the two were completely destitute. At a restaurant with the pair, Nero eats while yelling about the food. Deshtar does the same with his bread. Nagi tells them they'll choke at that pace and to eat slowly. If he understood their story correctly, basically, while he was away for a week in the cemetery dungeon, these two were throwing a tantrum, yelling at Anne to let them join because they invited their leader too. They claimed to be genius adventurers, and that she'd regret not letting them in. Anne reflects that these two were annoying, and hours had already passed. She tells them that from what she heard, he wasn't even their real leader, and they were tricked. She realizes reasoning isn't working because they won't listen. But wait, there was a method that might work. She says in that case she'll give them an entrance test. The two say they'll pass no matter what. Anne asks if that's so. Their entrance test was to gather 5,000 gold. They were broke, but they tried. Nero says even combined they don't have 500 gold. Deshtar comments the only tasks they can take are pest control, paying 30 gold. At this rate, they'd never join and would get fired, until a strange man approaches, asking if they need money and if they dreamed of getting rich quick. He said to put money in to earn more now, or they'd miss a rare opportunity. The two say this was the method. They didn't know it was the fastest way to get money. The man says it's starting, and calls them losers. Nero and Deshtar question this. It was also the fastest way to lose money, ending up with nothing. Nagi summarizes, they gambled everything away and starved for days. Deshtar says the leader saved their lives. The protagonist reflects that he knew adventurers were stubborn, but these guys are idiots. The entrance test was basically an excuse to extort them. Deshtar says he heard Vice Leader Agnisa personally invited him, but he rejected it. Nagi tells them he actually ended up joining in the end. The blonde gets surprised and tells him to ask them to let them join too. But wait a second, this was their test. If they don't pass with their own strength, it's meaningless. But he thinks along with Nero. They say it's still a lot of gold and they want his help. Nagi wonders what to do. All his weapons broke in the dungeon, and he needs gold. Now there was a perfect way to make money. Maybe he should check the guild for available dungeons. He tells them he'll help, so they should follow him. At the Adventurers Guild office, Petra continues signing her documents. Nagi catches her attention right away. The girl asks what brings them there. Nero tells her not to be surprised, because the leader is going to help them get rich and swim in money. Nagi says he'd like to take these two into a dungeon and wants to see what's available. Petra replies there are regulations. However, she immediately understands the protagonist's idea. She asks if he's thinking of going to that dungeon. A minecart starts moving along the tracks, heading toward a door. Deshtar screams about it, and Nero does the same. The necromancer says in the last dungeon they kept going up, and now they're going down. Nagi just says everything on the surface was already taken, so they need to go deeper. But they shouldn't worry. They're almost there, crossing through the door right after. They end up in the lower levels of the dungeon. Nero says this is weird. They came deep, but there are no monsters. Deshtar says he was dying for a fight. Nagi explains it's because this dungeon has already been cleared. Everyone wonders about that. The dungeon was a mining type, full of ore. It was one of the best places to make money even after being cleared, since the ore doesn't disappear. Because of this, guilds accept quests to clear all the monsters first. Then they hire miners to extract ore afterward. In other words, a mining dungeon was usually an empty field with no value. But the deepest part was different. The ores were untouched since transporting them cost too much money. Nagi says this was his target. Various ores are right in front of them. This was the D-rank mining dungeon. Nero tells them to look at all of it. Nagi explains there are many tons of high-quality ore here. This is where the true value of his backpack shines. It can solve the entire transportation problem, saying that now that they understand, they need to get to work. He pulls out a pickaxe. The two are terrified by this. A few minutes later, the group starts working. Deshtar asks why every time they enter a dungeon they end up like this. Nero says he wants to fight some monsters. The protagonist wipes the sweat from his brow. He says he used to do this kind of work all the time, but he thinks it's been a while since he got exhausted in just a few hours. Besides that, he thinks that, as expected, the sword technique had been too much for him. His body still wasn't fully recovered. He wonders what that was. It felt like he put every piece of himself into one strike, a sword technique that rivals an adventurer's talent. If he can really do that on his own, Gula appears from the backpack and calls the protagonist. The protagonist says she must have smelled the ores and came out. If she looks around, she'll find plenty of stones and mana to eat as much as she wants, but Gula denies it. Suddenly, the puppies start pushing her. Gula says these kids wanted to help him. She puts a miner's hat on her head, telling them to get all the ore off the ground. The puppies start mining and carrying ore. They split into two groups with their own tasks. Nagi comments that these guys are good. It makes sense. Dogs have solid coordination, thinking they asked for 10% of everything, but they were still efficient, and he was fine with that. Besides, he says things seem to be going well. Then he calls Van and Nero so they can eat, but notices something strange has happened. Nagi committed a critical error. There were certain taboos and jinxes one should never trigger inside a dungeon, like saying the dungeon is empty or easy. The moment those words are spoken, the difficulty spikes, and Nagi forgot something important. Van and Nero are idiots. Deshtar says at this pace, they'll be trapped for weeks just gathering ore. The most terrifying thing about idiots is when they start thinking, asking themselves if it wouldn't be easier to just smash everything. No adventurer could ever do that, except the genius Van Deshtar. His finger explodes one of the ores in front of him. The second scariest thing was when an idiot truly believed they were a genius. The two celebrate because it was brilliant, but the wall begins to crack. destroying everything into 2 pieces. Deshtar wonders what that was. A stone monster appears immediately. It starts moving its hands, opening 3 eyes at once and releasing a blast. The monster plants its foot on the ground, moving forward immediately. Nagi shouts for everyone to run. Nero is confused. They said the dungeon was clear. The protagonist explains that Van's explosion triggered the opening of a secret section in the dungeon, known as the secret room. Secret rooms are called a dungeon within a dungeon, and are connected to a point rarely discovered. Finding one means valuable rewards inside. For most adventurers, it's a dream come true, but not for them. The guardian of this hidden room was a rank C target, the Yellowstone Golem. There was no way this group could handle that. Nero yells for the captain to look ahead. The exit was completely blocked. It seemed the explosion reached all the way here. Deshtar complains it was his fault too, but Nagi says it was just proof of how strong he was. The boy takes it as a compliment, though Nero remarks it didn't seem like one. Gula says to leave it to them. The dogs will clear the path. Nero is surprised as a pack of dogs just bursts out of his backpack. Nagi thanks Gula for that. This settles what they need to do. While the escape route is being made, they have to distract the monster. Deshtar says this error happened because of him, so he'll take care of it. But Nagi says it's too dangerous. This mine has a high concentration of ether. If another explosion happens, they don't know how it will react. If a chain reaction explosion occurs and the dungeon collapses, they'd be buried alive. Deshtar wonders if he can't use his finger summoning, and if he can't use that, then he wants to know if he isn't just a normal person. Nero says to leave it to her. She's finally going to fight a monster. She had been waiting for this moment. Nero advances, heading out while warning that she will take this down by herself. Nagi tells her to be careful. Fighters and golems aren't a good matchup. The girl moves her flaming leg, hitting the monster's jaw, but she gets surprised by something. It was very hard and had hurt her foot. The golem starts running after Deshtar. Nagi questions if the girl is okay, asking if she has any special ability she can use. Nero says her skills are athleticism and flexibility. Deshtar interrupts, asking how many times he has to tell her that's not a talent, yelling that she was famous on the battlefield for having absolutely no talent. Nagi thinks this is bad luck. If she had an ability, they could find a way to use it. Special abilities are precisely what adventurers need to fully utilize their talent, like Agnisa's fire or Van's finger ability. Deshtar says honestly, her physical ability was on par with a special ability, but the girl says that wouldn't help. Nagi thinks that in the end, the only thing he can do is the sword technique from before. The only weapon he has now was that thing he got in the graveyard dungeon. The group is surprised to see the relic. Nines says even if it's not super valuable, it seemed useful, and Stonemung wonders what to do. The knight questions if he can have it because he liked the design and it was pretty. Agnisa says she's going to be clear, because a certain useless person who did nothing throughout the dungeon was trying to take the relic. Stonemung says he couldn't even use the weapon. Agnisa speaks up. If everyone is okay with it, she would like to give this relic to Nagi. His equipment suffered a lot of damage in this fight after all. The protagonist thinks that even being a low-level relic, they are meant to be useful for adventurers. Being the Blade of the Dead, it was on a completely different level than the store-bought weapons he was using. If he combines the relic's power with the sword, then he could cut a golem. The problem was the preparation time. The technique requires focus and a lot of time. So he tells Nero and Van to hold on a little because there is a way to take it down. Nero says to leave it to her. Even she can handle this. Nagi shouts to be careful because if they take a hit, they'd be wounded. The girl advances toward the golem. She thinks she doesn't have the attack power to break through the golem's defenses, but the monster tries a palm attack. Nero dodges, jumping off its hand and starts to climb, speaking that when it comes to running, she's the best. The monster tries to attack her again, approaching with its palm, but she just looks back. Nagi draws the sword, thinking everything starts with the unsheathing, but nothing happens. Nero descends from atop the monster, performing a few more acrobatics in the air until reaching the ground. The monster looks at her kinda weird, following the girl's movements. Nero says if she couldn't do this, she couldn't be an adventurer. Deshtar watches this from afar, talking about his friend. She was getting impatient again, just like she was on the battlefield. Then he yells for the captain to do something quickly. Nagi concentrates his energy, drawing the sword with ether. Nero dodges yet another blow from the golem. She tells them not to worry, remembering when she was teased for having no special ability. She had been underestimated just for being a beast woman, but even so, she still wants to become a great adventurer. Dodging all the golem's blows with acrobatics, Nero says she was going to prove it to everyone. The sword is completely drawn. Nagi thinks this is ready. It was the same feeling as before. He feels that he could cut through anything that exists in the world. Deshtar yells to wait a second, calling Nero's name. She needs to look behind her. The girl gets scared by this, but the protagonist's blow approaches. As the strike attempts to attack the girl, Nero is thrown far away by it. The protagonist continues in his state of concentration, moving his foot and his sword. Then he uses the quick sword, which diverts the trajectory away from Nero. The strike nears the monster's face, cutting a part of all that. An explosion happens inside the cave. The smoke starts to dissipate. Deshtar questions what he had done because it was incredible, and Nagi just sighs. But the necromancer mentions that thing. The protagonist asks him not to speak, but Deshtar questions if they had taken it down. A girl comments that Nero works very hard and everyone knows it, but honestly, she doesn't help much with anything. They just imagine what happens if she ends up on the same team as them in training. Another girl says she would fail the exam since she was the only one there who didn't have a special ability. Seriously, they asked themselves what a beast woman was doing trying to become an adventurer. She only ran errands for them. Besides that, she's a black cat and brings bad luck. Nero sighs, panting after the battle. Deshtar questions if she was okay, and the girl confirms. But she wants to know what that was just now, and if the captain really defeated the golem. Nagi speaks that he wasn't able to. At the last moment, he lost focus. Amidst the smoke, the golem emerges with an immense wound on its shoulder. Nagi says he must have missed. The golem looks at the group. Deshtar says she flew into the captain's field of vision and blocked his aim. Nero wonders if it was all her fault, crying over it while Deshtar says this doesn't seem like her. Nagi stands up speaking that it wasn't her fault and he was the one who committed the error. His technique was still incomplete, and that was the reason. Thinking that if he had mastered his swordsmanship technique, he could have landed the blow without hitting Nero. But with his current condition, that wasn't something he can do properly. His body reacts to it, and half of him felt broken. The golem tries another blow, approaching while using a burst of fire. The group says that thing looks furious. Nagi says first they need to, but the golem's stones interrupt his phrase. They fly toward the group. This was the stone breath. The group starts to fall through the floor, falling into a corner much deeper underground. The golem remains standing together with the stone. Nagi crawls out from under a rock, asking if everyone was okay. Van says he was more or less okay, but wants to know what they should do. The golem moves its hand, approaching Van and Deshtar very quickly. The necromancer just screams in fear. Nero yells that it shouldn't dare touch her group, advancing with 2 pickaxes and striking the monster. Nagi says it was dangerous and she should come back. The pickaxe in the girl's hand shatters. She wonders what to do. Her attacks weren't working anyway, but there must be a way. This crappy gear was just slowing her down. She was a martial artist, and that was reason enough. The golem was full of cracks. If she aimed for the fractures the leader made, she strikes the monster's shoulder. The girl tells herself, if that's not enough, then she has to hit it twice. If twice doesn't work, then 3 times. She keeps repeating 3 times. She just has to keep hitting. Her hand is completely worn raw, but the girl keeps pounding the creature. The golem gets scared now that it's actually taking damage. It moves its hand, throwing the girl far away. Nero slams her back against the wall, shattering many rocks with the impact. Back on the battlefield, she could have argued with her teammates who underestimated her and forced her to realize this. But imagine this strange situation, thinking that it wouldn't change anything, and that they never truly accepted her. In the end, what she needed was to prove it to herself. Van might be stubborn, but he can summon powerful explosions. And the captain split the golem with just his swordsmanship. She was the flaw in the raid group. If she wants to keep standing beside them as an equal, she has to prove she's worthy too. The golem's hand approaches the girl. Deshtar asks what she's doing. She needs to get out of there. The strike closes in on the girl. She keeps her head up because she's going to prove it to herself. The golem's blow hits her. The 2 guys are surprised by this. Nagi says he had no doubts about that stance. This phenomenon was something he'd seen countless times while working as a porter behind adventurers. Sometimes this happens to adventurers. The monument of enlightenment. Nero is glowing as the strike approaches. Her eyes were closed. In her head, she walks through a sea, wondering where she is, since she thought she was fighting a golem just a second ago, wondering what this could be. A voice speaks, "You who walk the path of battle, to you whom I have seen strength in, you shall receive my power." This was the martial artist's monument, the gladiator Galatus. With this, she must take the lives of monsters and conquer dungeons, and save her world. They say that for gifted adventurers, this phenomenon is growth. He never found it himself, but he knows that those who remain standing can always take another step. Nero clenches her fist tightly, activating her martial artist special ability. It's called Shockwave. The girl charges forward with her martial artist talent, striking the golem's head, and destroying it quickly. The monster is surprised by all of this. Its chest has 4 holes caused by Nero's shockwave, the neon punch. The golem starts roaring as it falls. The 2 team members are impressed by this. That golem finally disintegrates. Nero looks excitedly at her fists and says she got super strong. Special abilities were talents adventurers are born with, continuing to grow according to their class. This guarantees physical and agility improvements. But great growth comes from the Monument of Enlightenment, which appears when a significant event occurs, granting unique powers. For example, Stonemung gained the Elder's Wisdom. Because of that, he gained a Stone Mage ability that allows him to use defensive spells. But if he had acquired a nature magic spell, he could use wood spells instead. In this way, special abilities share the same talent pool. The little dogs finish clearing the rocks. Nero tells them to move aside because she's going to break this. She squeezes her fist with energy. She activates her shockwave talent, using the neon fist advance. The little dogs are impressed, and Nero says her ability was really amazing. But suddenly the rebound hits her. She comments that her head is suddenly spinning. Nagi tells her to stay calm. It's a symptom of exhausting ether, and happens when you use too much. Ether is the energy that allows adventurers to use their talents. Getting exhausted after using the ability twice means it was very strong. Nero asks if Van heard that, because her special ability is awesome. But then she gets completely shocked. Van Deshtar wonders what that thing in his hand is, because it suddenly flew out of the golem. Nagi says it was a soul resonance. He hadn't met many adventurers with necromancer talent, but he heard they can extract souls from monsters that match their affinity. Van says he remembers hearing about that at camp. That means it's his. So he squeezes the ghost, absorbing it into his body, commenting that he feels it coming to him. His ability was handiwork, and if he adds the Yellowstone Golem's soul to it, he understands how to use the ability. This was the soul impression he managed to move to his finger. Then he uses the thumb summoning immediately, with his necromancer talent called Arise. The golem starts to emerge from the smoke, turning into a huge thumb of Van's. He says it's much bigger than the original, but the height difference makes him dizzy, so he tells the monster to kneel. That golem obeys the orders immediately. Van says it's much better at this eye level. Nero complains that she did the hard work, but he got all the payment. Van says it's just because he's a genius. The girl yells at him to send that thing back before it explodes. Nagi reflects that this is how adventurers get stronger in an instant. It was so fast that people without talents couldn't keep up. He was genuinely happy they were both evolving quickly, since the world needs more powerful adventurers to clear dungeons. Then he tells them to calm down, because they've already taken down the Guardian, so all that's left is to check the hidden room, lighting a candle while telling everyone to stay alert. Even though they defeated the Guardian, no one knows what might be inside. If the reward is good, they don't need to mine and could easily reach their goal. Van says he wants something high value because he wants to join the guild soon. Nero agrees, since they were only saving money from mining. Nagi says those two seem close, wanting to join the guild together. Most people split up after training. He wonders how they ended up like this. Van says he doesn't remember, and wonders when they started hanging out. Nero repeats the moment they became friends. It had been when she was behind the door and someone called them brats, because they should stop talking shit there, since that doesn't work together with the future genius adventurer like him. And everyone gets scared because his clones were close to exploding. Nero says there's no need to even ask about that, since it was natural for the top 2 in the training center to team up. Van says that's how it was, and agrees. Then Nero says that now that they have special abilities, the 2 of them are unstoppable. Deshtar comments that there was something making him curious, wanting to know what exactly the captain's backpack was. Nero says she was thinking about that too, because weird stuff keeps coming out of it. Deshtar questions if he doesn't have swordsmanship talent, but Nagi says it was rare. Usually people get talents compatible with their class during the ritual, but in rare cases it wasn't a talent, but a special weapon. His backpack was one of those cases. Nero says she didn't even know about that kind of thing, and wants to touch his backpack. Nagi tells her not to even think about it, but to her it would just look like a normal backpack with a bottom. However, when the captain puts his hand in there, just like that, there were even lollipops. Nero says that's magic, but Nagi says this backpack stores everything perfectly, so they're still fresh. The girl comments that with this ability, he could be rolling in money. Deshtar agrees, since he wouldn't even need to clear dungeons, and it had infinite uses. Nagi says that if it were just for money, yes, but he tried using it for all sorts of things, starting with selling food to famous restaurants. Then he started transporting large quantities of supplies too, but he didn't do it to get rich. If he could help an adventurer deal with another dungeon in this world, that was enough for him. Then he says they seem to have already reached the end of the secret room while they were talking, and there it was. This must be the secret reward with strange statues. Nagi says it was something rare called statue exchange. If you show something, you'll receive a reward in return, but they shouldn't worry. He puts the backpack on the floor. He comments that this statue doesn't ask for valuables or expensive things. They figured it out by looking at its clothes. It looked like a farmer. So, for a farmer statue, a simple potato should do the trick. The statue's eyes started glowing. A smile spread across its face. Then, it spat a gem out of its mouth. Nero shouted that it was just a rock. Nagi said that this alone was more than enough to hit their quota. The girl told them to try trading with the next statue too. The protagonist analyzed the next one. Seeing it looked like a mage statue, he figured he needed mage-related things. He wondered if a magic stone or something similar would work, but the monster just stared with red eyes, enraged that he failed its test. Nagi stated he'd failed. He didn't think something like this would happen. The two wondered if they only got one chance. The water here felt dank and disgusting. Nagi said that was his weakness solution, and they really needed to be careful with the last statue. It was a zombie statue. They said it was their last test, so they'd better not mess up. They needed to win here. If it was a zombie, it must want human flesh or blood. Van wondered if he should offer his finger or something. Nagi told him to wait. He had something that might fit. Maybe bones grabbed from the cemetery dungeon or fresh meat. But hold on a second. A zombie used to be human. Maybe it wanted something different. He thought it might be similar to the farmer. That meant maybe what it wanted was a golden apple. The two wondered if the captain was joking. They were done for. But Nagi told them to calm down. It was a gamble, but this apple was from a southern region and held purification energy and divine power. If he was right, maybe what the zombie wanted was to be healed. A drop from the apple began to trickle down, falling onto the zombie's hand. It started to shine, remembering its past. A bright light illuminated the room the protagonist was in. He told them to watch. The zombie was being healed. The statue was transforming into something secret, turning into the figure of a king. The two said they could count on the captain. The villager revealed a golden box. Nagi and his group were surprised, but the chest opened on its own, emanating a brilliant glow. Nagi announced that this was a relic. Back at the Twilight Wind Guild office, Anne grabbed the sack of coins, saying they really brought back that much. The two claimed it was nothing for geniuses like them, and now they wanted to join the guild. Van said they finally did it. Honestly, he thought she was trying to scam them, but after going out to earn gold, it all made sense. She wanted them to grow through experience, and they even unlocked new abilities thanks to it. Anne agreed with them, wondering what was wrong with these idiots, but it didn't matter. She would get things done now. At the Adventurers Guild, a girl approached. She smiled, showing her cat ears, and walked up to Petra next. The inspector noticed her immediately, saying they were back. Van and Nero. Nero had returned along with Nagi, and with those emblems on their clothes. She congratulated them on joining the guild. Nero stated there was nothing they couldn't do with their talents. Van added that the Twilight Wind Guild had an eye for talent. The girl told Petra to listen well. They went to the depths of the mining dungeon. Van even exploded, and a golem appeared. They defeated it, and now they wanted to trade something valuable. Petra said that was impressive. Nagi changed the subject, saying the reason they were there was because of an item. He wanted to know if the appraiser was available. Nero agreed, and the protagonist stepped in front of her. Showing the martial artist relic, Petra asked if they found this in the mining dungeon. Their luck was incredible to have found a secret room. Petra could do a basic evaluation. Van said they should just sell it now, but Nero refused. Since this was the first relic they got from a hunt, they couldn't sell something so valuable. Back in the dungeon, Van yelled about finding a relic. He wondered about all this, wanting to know what it was. Nero questioned if it was better than emeralds. Nagi wondered if these idiots really didn't know anything. He explained that relics are special equipment used by adventurers. They are more valuable than normal items, and this one was identified as a martial artist relic. Given that Nero awakened her special ability in this dungeon and found the martial artist relic, it seemed like fate. He wanted to know if Van was thinking the same thing he was. Deshtar said they were on the same page. Nagi said it was a gift for Nero for unlocking her ability, but Van shouted they should sell it. The two got into an argument over it. Nero celebrated because he planned to give her the relic. Van insisted they sell it because the gold was enough to buy top-tier equipment with plenty left over, but Nero refused. Petra interrupted, saying Van shouldn't do that. Comparing a relic to normal equipment was an insult in itself. Relics are the heart of adventures and the key to conquering dungeons. Each relic is a magical artifact with its own abilities. Its real value comes alive when it resonates with ether. So, a single relic that matches an adventurer's ether would make them become much stronger. The two said that was the reason so many adventurers explored dungeons. Nagi thought Petra was absolutely correct. Some high-level adventurers are practically covered in relics from head to toe, but ironically, the existence of relics had made skill equipment like his backpack seem obsolete. No matter how useful the ability was, in this world, there were many relics that would be better. better. Petra said she would take a look to appraise the relic, using her scout talent. She converted the relic's properties into text. The evaluation finally completed, and the relic began to split apart, transforming into something completely new. It turned into the copy, rare rank. It copies the user's ability. That relic started meowing because of its cat form, manifesting into smoke headed towards Nero, and then it fused with the girl's ether. Nero said it equipped itself. Petra congratulated her. It seemed she and the relic had great compatibility. Nero questioned this. The inspector explained that some relics don't let their owners choose them. They choose their own owners. Nero asked if Van heard that. It was hers now. But Deshtar said, thinking about it, the captain must have a relic too, as she felt similar energy from him. Nagi said he got it in the cemetery dungeon, and it was in very bad condition. Relics are very hard to repair. Petra questioned what he did to end up like that. The protagonist recounted that he swung it once, and that happened. Van said he messed up, but if not for that, it would have cut. Petra reflected on splitting the golem in two. That was a Geddes relic made of black iron, and he swung the sword once and left it in that state. The more she learned about him, the more impressed she became. Even without talent, Nagi continued advancing, while she didn't. The protagonist apologized for coming there just to chat. They had a meeting, so they needed to return to the guild first. Rasha noticed Petra's expression, analyzing it for a few seconds with curiosity. Back at the Twilight Wind Guild office, red ink spread, marking an X. Agnesa said that made the 30th dungeon that had a recent break. It was forming a single line, and these breaks were happening in a pattern. It was too coincidental. Each of these dungeons was directly connected to the Dawn Guild. If this pattern continued, the next dungeon that would break was right there. They needed to go ahead to prevent the break. A direct confrontation with the Dawn Guild was going to happen. The master of that guild warned them not to allow failures or interference. Starting from the rift that V personally interfered with, the cemetery dungeon, which was certainly going to experience a break, they had been interrupted many times. That was the exact reason why, no matter what happened, they must ensure the dungeon break, even if it meant eliminating everything in their path. But Need questioned what the commander was worried about, since Y was already in that dungeon. As long as something was in that woman's interest, she moved like a viper and never let go. So he didn't want to get involved with her if he wanted to help, and that same woman gave him a very specific warning. Agnesa was her target. The girl stood in her room, analyzing the board. She reflects on the Dawn Guild. They were planning something. They always orchestrate a break, then fix it themselves to deflect suspicion. She just doesn't understand their goal. Suddenly, Nagi knocks on the door, asking if Agnesa had sent for him. She remarks that he's finally arrived. The protagonist mentions she had a task for him, and she confirms it. Her guild, Twilight Wind, decided to clear an A-rank dungeon that was on the verge of breaking. Van and Nero declared they would handle it, excited to finally have a real mission. But Agnesa told them it was impossible. They were both far too weak for such a task. The two shouted that she hadn't even seen their talent, mentioning they even stole a golem's soul, but Agnesa insisted they wouldn't survive that dungeon. Nero was surprised immediately after. She wondered if it was because she had started sensing ether, but now she could feel the aura around the vice leader. Her ether was on a completely different level. That meant Agnesa was right. They wouldn't be any help at all. Nagi said that if she called them there must be a reason. Agnesa confirmed it, explaining that Nines' group and he were planning to clear the dungeon. She wanted to know if he realized that this dungeon suited the protagonist perfectly. It was located in the Northwest Canyon region, a massive underground labyrinth with a pit, also known as the Ant Nest Dungeon. Nagi, Nero, and Van were going to clear this dungeon. It would be their first mission as members of Twilight Wind, and for this dungeon invasion, Nagi would be the group leader. The protagonist questioned this. After all, he was just a porter. But Agnesa asked if he didn't know. When she recruited him for Twilight Wind, it wasn't as a porter, but as an adventurer. So for this mission, she wants him to assume command and lead the dungeon clear. And thus, Nagi's first mission as a group leader began. But ahead of them lay unexpected challenges. They were beyond anything he could ever imagine. Ants kept marching forward, chasing the running adventurer. Suddenly, he looked back and was struck in the chest by a stinger. The ants kept approaching. The adventurer wondered how this could be a C-rank dungeon. It should have been at least rank B or rank A, especially that giant ant, wondering what the hell that thing was. Because of it, all his companions had lost their lives. A woman said she had been waiting for this. Sitting on a broom, she called Agnesa's name. Later, in the guild office, Nagi placed bread on the table, commenting that making him a group leader so suddenly was overwhelming. He wondered if it shouldn't be at least a gold rank, but Agnesa said it was fine since the request was made under her guild's name. She had already signed off on it anyway. But Nagi remarked that even if it was a C-rank dungeon, they would fail if it were just the three of them. Agnesa told him not to worry about that. He already knew that Ant Nest dungeons were usually tackled jointly with other guilds, so he would have other raid teams. He didn't need to worry about failing. Besides, he had already led the Rift dungeon, and honestly, he had led the cemetery one too. Nagi was someone she chose personally, so he should trust himself. And there was one more thing. Someone in the ant nest would be his perfect support. He's a bit harsh sometimes, but he would be a great help. Nagi said he understood, but in that dungeon, they needed something major. Agnesa commented that they must be thinking the same thing. They both spoke about a scout at the same time. The ant nest dungeon was a constantly changing labyrinth, so a scout was essential to guide their path, not forgetting the clearing aspect. Agnesa said exactly. She was trying to find one, but even as mercenaries, no one wanted to go. At the Adventurers Guild, Petra apologized to some adventurers until she recognized them. Ring was a silver rank scout. She commented that they hadn't seen each other since training school, and Petra mentioned hearing she had joined a guild, but Ring told her to wait. Petra was speaking too casually. Even if they were friends in training school, Petra was still a white level. Meanwhile, Ring was a silver level adventurer, unlike her. Petra might have had good grades before, but in the end it didn't make her an adventurer, so she should know her place first. Petra agreed and apologized to the adventurer. She didn't mean to offend her. Ring said she was sure she'd see her around, hoping that after some jobs she might pass the time. Rasha asked who those people were, and Petra replied they were school colleagues. It was because of the stereotype that scouts who became inspectors were a waste of talent. A scout's talent is used to lead a group on the front lines during dungeon exploration. Outside of dungeons, they are used in many other ways. Sometimes they choose to become inspectors instead of adventurers. But the truth was, inspectors are viewed as failures who gave up on their talent or spirit to become adventurers. Rasha said she was the perfect example. She thought she had adventurer talent, but she lacked the skills or mindset to be a scout, so she became an inspector. But Petra wasn't like her. Petra could become an adventurer. That was why everyone was shocked when she said she would become an inspector. Petra replied it was because of her grandfather, who was completely against her becoming an adventurer. Rasha said he was a very strict guy. Petra denied it. He had been crying, begging her not to. But her friend questioned if that was really her decision. She wanted to know what Petra really wanted. She read the paper Petra had been working on recently. It seemed more like a diary than a thesis. She started reciting about the way Nagi looked at Lady Agnesa. Rasha said she thought the same way, the way she looked after returning from the Rift dungeon with the porter, Nagi, and how she looked when she heard they were going to the mining dungeon. It seemed like she was screaming that she also wanted to become an adventurer. Petra ran towards a room, walking through the hallways as she thought. She said Rasha was right. The truth was, she always wanted to be an adventurer, so she got stuck in the training center without her grandfather knowing. When he eventually found out and cried, she realized something. More than her dream of becoming an adventurer, Petra wanted to be a good granddaughter who could take care of him. She knew he went through hard times after her parents lost their lives, and all she has is the dream she hadn't given up on, or something like that. Rasha analyzed it, calling Petra's name and asking if she was some kind of idiot. The girl questioned this, not understanding anything. Rasha said maybe now her grandfather wanted her to have a safe life, but what he really wanted was for her to be happy doing what she loved. Petra said she really did it, wondering if it was okay and if she could really go with what Rasha had said. Then she knocked on the office door a few times, announcing she was there for the adventurer exam. She wants to change careers from inspector to adventurer. A butler said there was enough time for a cup of coffee to get cold, but he wasn't sure if it would be worth anything since she had done very well as an inspector, and it would be better to continue on that path. Petra said her friend recommended taking the exam, which luckily was today, but the butler disagreed. The correct phrase would be unfortunately, since he was the examiner this time, so he should introduce himself as Mr. Pachi. She probably knew him better as the adventurer killer. Petra thought she had heard of him. He doesn't literally take adventurers' lives, but his exams are notoriously strict. Most fail, and those who pass have low ranks. Pachi said he didn't need to test her. People like her trying to change careers show up every year, but the chance was less than 5%. Maybe their talent or ether changes over time, or abilities awaken late. They come for the class transfer with hope in their minds, but they will only find hopelessness. That machine measuring potential was absolute. If her talent was lower than before, there was no chance of improving, so she didn't need to do this. Just place her hand on the spot, and it would show the girl the truth. Thinking that he was Mr. Pachi and had seen this kind of thing hundreds of times, he bet she wouldn't even pass the ether test. If she were going to become an adventurer, it would have happened a long time ago. Petra honestly isn't sure she's doing the right thing. It goes against her grandfather's wishes after all, but the reason her heart changed wasn't just a desire to be adventurous. She asked Nagi once why he keeps risking his life in dungeons. He answered as if it were nothing. He said it was just something someone has to do. Petra thinks that sounded so casual, but she knew what it meant. Invading a dungeon without ether protection was like diving into fire with no gear, even for a porter. And yet, he spoke those words as if they were obvious. Petra just felt ashamed of herself. Even with her natural talent, she hadn't done anything. Outside the exam room, the girl breathes deeply. Ring approaches, telling them to look. She really came back to test to be an adventurer again. They had been there less than 30 minutes, so she must have aced it. They want to know her thoughts on becoming an adventurer, until Petra moves her gold necklace. The other girl is impressed, wondering what that thing was. In her chair, Rasha complains. Petra was a great co-worker and told her nothing, and now she's lost a friend. Back in the guild room, Agnesa says she searched everywhere with no luck. Nagi remarks that the ant dungeon is a cleanup job most adventurers avoid. It was rare to find a scout who wanted it. Agnesa says that's good, because if they were going to join the dungeon scheme, they'd have to leave tomorrow morning. Nagi agrees. He asks for a scout to just fall from the sky right this second. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door. Petra asks permission and enters the room. She asks if they have room for one more in their guild, introducing herself as the gold rank scout. The two are completely shocked. They ask if it really worked. In Pachi's room, the other scouts wonder what just happened. It must have been an error. A white rank would never suddenly become a gold rank. A secretary agrees, wanting to know how the examiner could skip protocol and award a gold rank so suddenly. Pachi says he believes in himself, and the Adventurer Association's incompetence was increasing anyway. They wonder how she was classified as white rank with such an absurd potential for ether. Mr. Pachi stakes his entire reputation on this. She absolutely deserves it. Mark his words, one day she will reach mithril rank or beyond. In his office, he drinks some coffee. It's been a long time since he felt like this. It was like discovering a hidden gem in the mud. This feeling of fun was something no job usually gives an examiner. That's why the coffee tastes better. But the secretary enters the room with a warning. They had a problem. Had he heard about the girl named Petra he approved for gold rank yesterday? Apparently, it was a sensitive issue involving her grandfather. Mr. Pachi's mug hits the floor. He complains that he is finished now. Elsewhere, horses walk. The group is on top of their carriage. Petra sighs deeply as she sits. Nagi asks what's wrong, and if she's still irritated by what he said earlier. Petra confirms. She wonders why she had to say that. Agnesa calls out to Petra. She says they know there's nothing wrong with her, but if she really wants to join the guild, she has to discuss her mindset as an adventurer. Every adventurer faces strong monsters or enemies they simply cannot defeat. Agnesa wants to know what Petra will do if she encounters one. Petra thinks this is the same question she heard from Nagi before. She says that if she has to face something like that, she should just fight dirty. Everyone is completely surprised by her answer. Agnesa says that's disappointing to say the least. Petra asks why. She repeats the question to Nagi. The boy asks who knows. Now that he thinks about it, he experienced that himself. An enemy he could never defeat, like the Lich or Agnesa. He faced both. No matter who the opponent is, what matters is the majority. Petra replies that wasn't what he had said, and so Petra's entry into the guild is conditional on her test, the ant nest dungeon. The girl says she will give it her all. Nero says this isn't right. Petra needs to explain. They want to know how she became a gold rank before them. Van agrees, wanting to know if she's as strong as the captain. Petra explains that scouts can always choose between becoming adventurers or working as inspectors. She just switched careers. Nero says so that was it. That meant something to them. He calls her the secret boss, and Petra asks about that. Nagi continues, saying that knowing she is a gold rank scout makes him feel safer in this dungeon. The previous Rift dungeon was easier with her talent. Petra replies that she doesn't have much field experience, but they should trust her. She knows the ant nest dungeon like the palm of her hand. She prepared for everything, from the layout to the types of ants. Nagi says she really came very prepared, but he was in an ant nest dungeon before as a porter. That dungeon was truly scary. No matter how much they prepare, it's something that can't be dealt with using logic alone. Petra calls out the protagonist for his discouragement. She says he'd better prepare himself for what's coming. Facing the immense hole, Nero identifies it as the tunnel entrance. Nagi asks Petra's thoughts. She replies that judging by the mana concentration, it's a C-rank dungeon as advertised, but cooperation would be great. Nagi agrees. They say the ant nest dungeon is cave-sized, and the entrance is huge. Suddenly, someone appears and questions who they are. He wants to know what they're looking at. They are from the guild No Answer, and his name is Gerald, the raid leader. He tries to discover who the captain is. He assumes it's Petra because she is a gold rank scout, but the girl denies it. The captain is Nagi. Gerald evaluates his rank. He says Nagi is just a porter. Another colleague of his bursts out laughing. It's hilarious that a white rank would be a raid captain. Nagi says he expected this kind of reaction. Nero says this guy doesn't recognize a sleeping beast. Petra complains that this is very rude. She hates judging someone entirely by their rank. Gerald questions that response, asking if their captain really is a white rank. In that case, case, he has a suggestion. Why doesn't she join his team? His current scout is only a bronze rank, and besides, she's beautiful. Petra refuses since her captain Nagi is much more qualified. Gerald says he understands. These clowns really are something. Perhaps they should show how a porter is treated. He orders his luggage guy to get over there, asking if he was grinding his teeth again. Something moves along the ground, crawling. Gerald says these days porters are full of complaints and act as if they're losing their lives. The boy just apologizes to Gerald. Petra asks if that isn't too much to carry, since it's way above the limit. Gerald speaks up. They must carry it and not spend energy talking. This is how a porter must be treated. If her captain is a porter, everyone will be treated like porters. Petra says she expected this, but didn't think it would be so bad. Nagi tells her not to worry. He thinks they are just guys like that. Porters are always overloaded. At least 7 porters had backpacks bigger than themselves. Nagi had forgotten after working for decent adventurers for a while, but this is how porters are treated. They are just walking backpacks. A girl speaks up saying they seem eccentric, but that doesn't matter. In a dungeon like this, they had no choice but to clear it themselves. Everyone is strong after all. They just agree with Johanna. But the girl says dungeons scare her, so it would be better to have the highest number of allies possible. Gerald says that if Lady Johanna speaks, he will follow. It's better to stay close to them for protection. He says the guy should be grateful to Miss Johanna. Normally, he would have started a fight with his guild. Now, he just needs to stay at the back the entire time. Johanna wonders if it's time to head out. She's sure this is going to be an incredible adventure. Nagi watches her from a distance, noticing the snake tattoo on her shoulder. Suddenly, the fangs start to bloom. He feels a surge of energy headed his way. Petra asks what's wrong. Nagi tells her it's nothing, just a bad feeling. He expected to be treated like this anyway. I guess they just have to follow along now like they said. Van cheers, happy that his dungeon finally looks the part. Everyone approaches the massive pit leading down into the ant dungeon. At first glance, it looks like a standard dungeon, aside from the ant monsters, but most people don't know what this place really is. Among adventurers, it's known as the Ant Hell Pit, a labyrinth maze of tunnels. It's packed with endless waves of ant attacks. He was sure the real danger hadn't even begun yet. Nagi thinks he was lucky to tag along with the main raid group for this mission. With his inexperienced team, trying this alone would have been tough, but after just 30 minutes, he realized exactly what kind of guys they were. They were the adventurers he'd only heard about in stories, the so-called 3 types of dungeon hopelessness. Van asks about it, and Nero demands to know what it means. Petra explains it's a famous classification among adventurers for people who frequently run dungeons. The first is called the Brainless Charger. It doesn't matter what monster or trap lies ahead. They only know how to charge forward blindly. No tactics, no strategy, just brute force, even if it means hurting teammates or porters and breaking formation. The second type is the Stubborn Mule. No matter what warnings you give them, like that chubby guy saying he doesn't care because they're the main raid team, they won't listen. They insist they're right and refuse any advice. Their egos make the dungeon a total nightmare. And the last one is the Flirt for Brains. Like when Johanna comments a guy is amazing, and he immediately says he'll protect her and take her for coffee later. He's the type of idiot who comes to a dungeon looking for love instead of fighting monsters. So, in conclusion, this hopeless team was the best he could get. Nagi wonders if they'll actually be able to clear this dungeon. The scene takes place in the Ant Nest dungeon, a place that appears from time to time. Because of this, the association gathers guilds to do a routine sweep of its sectors, but since the rewards are terrible, nobody really wants the job. We're then told that the current guild is doing the same old thing, so they pick up the pace, wanting only to clear the bare minimum and get out of there quickly. But the more they push the pace, the more exhaustion builds up in one of them. Sweat is already pouring down his face, and his glazed eyes show he's at his limit. We then understand that with this rush, the porters end up getting exhausted. Expeditions need them to function, but most adventurers don't even care. At that moment, Nagi turns and asks if the boy is okay, offering to carry his load. The porter refuses the help, telling him not to worry about it right now. He then struggles to his feet, saying that carrying the pack is his job. Nagi realizes the other guys on the team are pretty unpredictable and decides not to make a scene, but one of them loses his patience, grumbling irritably about the whole situation. He then turns and yells, asking what those lazy bums are doing just standing there. The big guy gets angry and yells at them to move, saying if they have time to talk, they have time to walk. But Petra confronts him, saying this isn't how you conduct a real expedition. He then calls her unbelievable, accusing her of dirtying the name of adventurers. Then he says she's getting all worked up over a porter, when her own leader is one. To show them how things work, he grabs a bag of coins and throws it far away. With a smug smile, he announces there are 10 gold coins in there, and whoever gets it can keep it. The porters are in shock, yelling in surprise at the mention of 10 gold coins. Petra panics and tries to warn them because that spot is a very dangerous trap, but they don't care about the danger and run off, yelling that it's their pay for the day. In the middle of the chaos, one of the porters manages to be faster and grabs the bag of gold. He's overjoyed, celebrating with tears in his eyes for getting the coins. But suddenly, several monster ants erupt from the ground, terrifying him. The boy looks back in panic, unable to believe the ambush that just happened. The scene cuts to a giant sword being drawn, making a menacing sound. It's the warrior, who activates his warrior's talent with a look ready for the kill. He then uses his ability, a whirlwind of winds that slices through all the enemies. With a single strike, he demonstrates his brute force, clearing the entire area. Nagi is shocked, and Petra admits that despite his attitude, the guy is very skilled, but Nagi sees the cruelty in it. The warrior knew about the ambush and used the boy as bait. The trap was dealt with easily, without any major complications for the group. But the porter ended up getting hurt, since they don't wear armor because of the weight. And even though there's a priestess on the team, she doesn't seem the least bit willing to help. With a cruel little smile, she makes it clear she won't waste her mana healing a porter. Nagi then questions him, saying the boy almost died because of that stunt. Geralt scoffs at him, explaining that adventurers pay and porters carry. It's that simple. The boy, afraid, says it's no problem, and that he's actually very grateful. He says he's actually thankful, since Geralt is the only one who still gives him work. With a victorious smile, Geralt tells him not to get confused just because he's the party leader. At that, Nagi understands that this is the harsh and sad reality for all porters. Then, another member chimes in, saying that since they have issues, something should be done. The blonde guy then suggests they split up, since the path ahead divides into two routes. Geralt agrees with a smile and tells Nagi's team to handle the dangerous Zone 1 by themselves. Despite the provocation, Nagi accepts the proposal without arguing, keeping his expression calm. In his thoughts, he figures it's for the best, but he already suspects the other team is up to something. The scene shifts to Zone 1, with the group climbing down a steep wall as Nero celebrates the action. They finally reach the bottom, and Nagi comments that the area is truly gigantic. He then explains that they were just in the tunnels before, but now they've reached the real nest. With that, Nagi warns the group to stay sharp, because they definitely didn't take the easy path. The scene cuts to Van Destar, who can't contain himself and starts laughing mockingly. He says their scout is a rookie, because if she were experienced, she would have avoided that route. Geralt is completely satisfied, since the other team will draw all the attention and make their job easier, and they don't even suspect a thing. As the map shows, the group was sent straight into a trap. Nagi's team has just unknowingly walked straight into a death vortex. They continue to advance cautiously through the cave, having no idea what awaits them ahead. Suddenly, the entire floor begins to tremble and crack, signaling that something is about to emerge. Petra gets goosebumps and wonders what that strange noise she's hearing is. Suddenly, a swarm of giant ants bursts from the ground, kicking up a huge cloud of dust. She panics and warns that they're coming from behind as the entire floor cracks open. But then someone corrects her, shouting that the attack is actually coming from above. With that, the monsters break through the ceiling and appear in a horde, completely surrounding the girl. Nero is terrified and yells to Nagi, warning him that the enemies are everywhere. Nagi then reflects, thinking that no one takes a porter seriously as a team leader, but he grips his sword tightly. Since she trusted him, he has to prove his worth. Now, with two swords in hand, he prepares to face the horde of monsters alone. With a furious look, he shouts for everyone to get ready and move to their battle positions. He takes the lead in the fight, and with his two swords, he readies himself for the first strike. With a single motion, he charges forward and cuts down the enemies with impressive speed. In his thoughts, he analyzes that the ants are dangerous because of their speed, but after witnessing Agnes's speed, he gives a very confident little smile. He finds the monsters so slow they're almost boring, and he charges at them without fear. Nagi advances on a monster, dodging its claws with a very agile move. He thinks that he doesn't need magic to cut down the normal monsters that appear before him, but his blade fails to pierce through, revealing their carapaces are too hard. What works here is what he learned as a porter, aiming for the weak spots. It's explained to us that porters have two functions. One is to carry equipment. The other, of course, is to collect all the items dropped from the monsters' bodies. And since adventurers never give them enough time, they learn to cut quickly and find the weak spots. It's because of this past experience that he knows exactly where to strike. The ants have a very weak joint around their waist, which is their blind spot. Because of this, even a common blade can easily cut through the monster's defense. The real problem, however, is that they attack in a coordinated swarm. They use their pheromones to stay in perfect sync during combat. But if he messes up the scent with something stronger, like a mushroom, everything changes. The strategy works, and the item's smell makes the monsters much slower than before. The creature still shrieks in pain as green goo splatters everywhere from the hit. After the attack, Nagi leans on his spear to catch his breath, but Nero shouts that he can't have all the fun to himself. With that, his cape flutters in the wind as he prepares to jump into action. He announces that it's their turn now and charges toward the monsters along with Van Destar. The girl then activates her martial artist talent, concentrating energy in her hand. Then, she unleashes her powerful Meow Meow strike, landing a direct hit on the enemy. The attack is so powerful it creates a shockwave, sweeping away several monsters at once. But then, a mysterious relic called Copycat appears out of nowhere and begins to glow. It copies Nero's ability and fires off several shockwaves that clear the area. Nero is impressed and shouts that the item is simply incredible to watch. Van Destar then announces it's his turn and activates his necromancer talent. He says it's time for the genius to shine and creates several clones of himself to fight. Nero and the clones then leap into the air and dive down on the enemies with full force. Nagi watches from a distance, thinking that fighting with magic is a lot easier, But he warns everyone to be careful and not waste their mana, as they still have a long way to go. Suddenly, Nagi feels a strange tremor, wondering what that sound is, so much stronger than the others. Desperate, he turns and yells to Petra, telling her to locate the ants for them now, but the girl just stammers, unable to give a clear answer, her face cast in pure shadow. Petra is frozen in front of a monster, thinking that scouts are supposed to guide the party. The creature lets out a deafening screech, baring its fangs and drooling a disgusting green liquid. She then thinks that she was trained for this, but seeing these creatures up close is just too terrifying. In a panic, the girl lets out a scream and runs off in the opposite direction, fleeing from the giant ant. Nagi's jaw drops, unable to believe what he's seeing, as a bead of sweat trickles down. He then grits his teeth hard, his red eyes glowing with pure frustration. The boy thinks the situation is a disaster, since their scout is in a total panic. To make matters worse, he remembers that his strongest fighters pushed too far ahead and ended up isolated. The scene shifts to show Nero and Van Destar surrounded on all sides, fighting back to back. Nero warns that he's out of ether, while Van complains that he's already lost 3 fingers in the battle. Back to Nagi, he thinks that as the leader, he should be reading the entire battlefield, but in reality, he's stuck there, busy trying to take down just a few ants by himself. He thinks this isn't like being a porter. He can't keep a cool head here. We're told there's something worse than dungeon disasters, the so-called failed raids. In other words, the real disaster isn't the creatures advancing on his party. With a look of pure hatred, he comes to the conclusion that they are the real disaster. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appears at the cave entrance and gets his attention with a shout. The masked man warns them that if they don't want to die, they'd better all get on the ground. He then materializes a small sphere of energy, preparing for a devastating attack. Papatman then hurls the object with all his might, and it flies like a cannonball. The sphere explodes in an insane wave of power, simply wiping out all the monsters in its path. Fallen on the ground, Nagi and Petra stare, completely stunned by what just happened. The girl then notices the symbol on his chest and wonders if he's a white-rank swordsman. The man laughs and says they must be the group a certain Agnesa mentioned. With an air of superiority, he states flatly that they're complete amateurs. He licks his lips, thinking it's been a while since he found a group as green as this one. The scene shifts to the guild, where a scream of panic echoes through the city's rainy street. Inside, an agitated adventurer shouts, asking Agnesa if the rumor he heard is true. He wants to know if she really had the nerve to send the guild's rookies to train with him. Eating a donut, she replies that yes, she sent them to Papatman's training. Hearing the name, the 2 adventurers let out a sharp cry of pure terror and despair. Outraged, they accuse her of being a demon, saying what she did was incredibly cruel. The young man explains they've barely become adventurers, and sending them there will be the end of them. With a terrified expression, he says it's obvious, because Papatman is the biggest weirdo in the entire guild, as shown by the plaque with his name and not-so-friendly nickname. Back in the cave, Nagi eyes the man suspiciously, wondering who the hell he is. He doubts the guy is really a white-rank swordsman, while the man just smiles. Just then, a shocked Petra approaches Nagi and asks if he really saw what happened. She can hardly believe he wiped out all those ants in a single blow without using a talent. Papatman then confirms it, saying he finished them all off using just a cheap fishing rod. He asks why they're so surprised, and informs them that Agnesa sent him there to help. Nagi processes this, thinking that Agnesa sent him to help, but then he remembers something. The scene cuts to a flashback, with Agnesa saying he'd find the perfect helper there. She had explained that he'd recognize him right away because the guy was one of a kind and had some issues. Back in the present, Nagi asks if he's the guy with personality problems she mentioned. Just then, Van and Nero approach. commenting that Nagi's face looks familiar. Popotman tries to dodge the comment, saying he just has one of those generic faces, but the pair disagrees. He ignores them and says Agnesa told him she was sending promising rookies, so he was quite excited. But then he breaks into a huge grin, preparing to give his honest and brutal opinion of the group. With a look of disgust, he says they are absolute trash, leaving everyone in shock. Nero and Van get angry, yelling that he was too cruel and that they took out plenty of ants too. The masked man admits with a smirk that their firepower wasn't bad, but he criticizes them, saying they wasted all their ether and broke formation like idiots. Then he turns to Nagi and Petra, saying that nothing is working and they just look lost. Popotman completes the humiliation by saying they didn't even realize they'd walked into an ant mill. His face red with shame, Nagi thinks that explains why there were so many ants. The bear, Popotman, explains that an ant mill is a death spiral where they walk endlessly. It happens when the lead ant gets lost, leaving the wrong scent trail behind. And if two of these trails happen to cross, it just adds to the confusion for the rest of the swarm. As a result, they just start circling the same spot, creating a vortex. They continue in this cycle until they die, and if it happens in a nest, the place becomes packed with monsters. Nagi is furious, realizing the other team led them there on purpose, and he wants to know why. He realizes the plan was to use them as bait to distract the creatures and clear a safe path. Furious, Nero shouts that she always knew they were bad news, and Van immediately agrees. Popotman then turns and asks them why they think the other group was bad. With a wide grin, the bear presses the question, wanting to understand their anger. Then he says that in a dungeon, the only truly bad thing is to be weak, as he unleashes his aura. The bear faces the group and says they lost because they weren't strong, because in here, power is everything. Popotman asks what they think would have happened if they'd picked a fight with that team. He answers his own question, saying they'd all be dead, but Nero refuses to believe they would have lost to them. He then agrees their tactics are crude, but if they made it this far, it means they're strong. Popotman the bear spits on the ground, preparing to say that they, on the other hand, are different. He points and says they lack both intelligence and strength, making Nero and Van angry at the taunt. Then he reveals what Agnesa said, that their mindset was right, but they'd die on a run. With a sinister smile, the bear informs them that's why she gave him permission to remake the group. He lets out a crazy laugh and corrects himself, saying he's actually going to train them the right way. Seeing the team's confusion, Popotman says that maybe a little demonstration will help them understand. The bear reveals that he was the one who trained Agnesa back when she was just a lost rookie. Nagi and Petra are shocked by the revelation, unable to believe he trained the guildmaster. With an intimidating gaze, he announces that since that's settled, it's time for the first lesson. Popotman then challenges all of them at once, shouting for them to come at him with everything they've got. The scene changes and shows us Agnesa, thinking that the most important thing for an adventurer is their mindset, but she adds that it's worthless without the strength to back up that mentality. As she eats, it's shown that she really hopes this whole experience gives Nagi and his group the strength they so desperately need to finally evolve. Back in the cave, a burst of blue energy explodes, cracking the ground around it. Popotman's lure flies fast, cutting through the air with a blue glow and a deadly whistle. The group scatters desperately, dodging the waves of energy the bear unleashes in every direction. Van shouts in frustration about the rod, saying there's no way he can keep up with its speed. But Nero tells him not to worry because with her shockwave, she doesn't need a direct hit. Popotman just smirks, finding her confidence and her speed to be quite slow. He easily dodges her attack, saying she wastes her ether thoughtlessly, and that's why Popotman simply leaps over the girl, who rushes past without even touching him. With his eyes glowing, he reveals he can see her every move before it happens. In a swift, precise motion, he prepares to counterattack with a well-aimed strike. Popotman then lands a kick on her back, and she cries out, surprised by the bear's speed. He explains that he knows her specialty is new, because she's spending ether so obviously. Seeing this, Van D-Star grits his teeth, furious that he's messing with his Nero. He then decides that's enough, announcing he'll summon his ultimate golem to end the fight. A giant stone creature rises from the earth, a brutal golem with a heavy aura. Popotman is impressed by the summon, admitting that now things could get dangerous. Van D-Star shouts in anger, ordering his golem to crush the bear, who is feeling the pressure. But before he can finish his sentence, Popotman lands a solid hit right on his head. The bear then mocks him, asking if he realizes how slow his body gets when summoning the golem. With a satisfied look, Popotman prepares for the next phase of his crazy training with them. He yells that now he wants to see if they can dodge his special fishing technique. The line of his rod transforms into an energy net that rushes toward Petra. The girl is in shock, unable to believe what she's seeing, and with no time to react. The energy net then closes in quickly, preparing to trap the adventurer in the middle. At that moment, she lets out a scream as she's captured. Popotman criticizes her, saying a scout who can't react to this shouldn't even be fighting. Nagi starts to believe he trained Agnesa, since a rod is harder to master than weapons. He notices the bear's range is huge, but he's still focused on his target. Suddenly, the lure flies in his direction, and he braces himself, knowing the attack is coming. With his eye glowing red, he stays focused, ready not to miss a single detail. He watches the line carefully and concentrates on its tip, waiting for the exact moment to act. Nagi thinks that if he's the target, he can block the attack, and uses his sword to defend himself. At the moment of impact, the tip of the lure explodes, releasing a wave of bluish energy. The force of the explosion throws Nagi backward, showing that the bear is much stronger than him. Popotman says it was a shame, as he reacted exactly as predicted and could have stopped the blow. He explains that this is his body's limit, since without ether, he's just a trained civilian. This weakness, according to Popotman, is just like the charger mark he has on his neck. But he tells Nagi to get up, because Agnesa said he was different from the others. Popotman wants to see the technique that killed a lich, but Nagi warns him it's too dangerous. The bear then starts to chuckle, finding the boy's concern completely ridiculous. He teases him, asking if Nagi is afraid of hurting him, which irritates the boy. Then the bear tells him to come at him with everything he's got, saying he can take it no problem. Nagi warns him that if he gets hurt, it's not his fault, and prepares to use his technique. Popotman analyzes his stance, noting it's a drawing technique and that his form is clean, but he bets Agnesa exaggerated, since she always has too much faith in hardworking people. Yawning, he asks how long he has to wait, and says this attack wouldn't land in a real fight. A blue energy starts crackling intensely, gathering in Nagi's hand for a single strike. With his focused red eye, he feels the technique is finally ready to be unleashed. Just then, the boy fires an intense flash of light that cuts through the air like a cannon. He then shouts a warning, saying he won't be responsible if the bear gets hurt. Popotman turns his head with an annoyed look, wondering if he's hearing this right. The bear tells him to stop being so dramatic because his sword style is no big deal. But suddenly, a giant wave of energy rushes toward him, and all he can say is, huh? With wide eyes, he realizes the attack was serious, and thinks he's totally screwed. We're shown that Popotman's plan was to be a mentor respected by all, but out of nowhere, a blue flash appears, heading straight for him, leaving him very confused. And then he takes the slash right across his face without even understanding why. At that moment, his eyes slowly open, revealing a fury that had been contained within. He thrashes around, desperately screaming for them to stop hitting him right now. The scene shows the group gathered together, with Popotman trying to figure out what happened. But then, Nero and Van Destar start shouting, doubting his ability as a master. Annoyed, Popotman yells back at them, saying he only let his guard down for a second. He turns furiously and points at Nagi, asking if he was trying to kill him. Nagi then explains that he warned him of the danger, and that he's lucky to be invincible. Popotman shouts that this wasn't a reason to throw aura in his face, leaving Nagi confused. He realizes Nagi doesn't even know what aura is. It seems more like an imitation of the technique. And Popotman thinks that if Nagi had truly mastered that aura and the technique, he would have actually died, because that was a power from a completely lost era. Popotman is shocked, unable to believe a charger with an incomplete technique did all this. With a smile, Popotman thinks that now he understands why the demanding Agnesa sent him. He then says he's figured out everyone's level and is ready to begin. At that, Popotman announces the second training session and asks if they know how he became Agnesa's teacher. Nagi guesses it's because he's stronger, but Popotman says that's only one reason. It's explained that he became her master due to his vast knowledge of ether. With so much study, he ended up becoming a true master on the subject. Because of this, he can see everyone's weakness and create specific solutions for their problems. Back in the present, he points to Nero and calls her Kitty to start the training. He says she doesn't understand anything about ether, which grants advantages when awakened. Popotman explains that for martial artists like her, the advantage is physical ability. But he warns that if she doesn't control her own ether, she's nothing more than an amateur. Her specialty is just uncontrolled energy, which is why her power runs out so quickly. With a malicious grin, he says that lucky for her, this place is a giant anthill. The area is full of ants and tight spaces, perfect for the training she needs. He then reveals the name of the challenge, the Endless Ant Room Escape. Popotman explains that he's going to trap her in a tight spot, with a single exit swarming with ants. He warns that if she keeps wasting her ether, she'll be trapped there forever. With that, the giant ant lets out a terrifying shriek, leaving Nero completely petrified. Then, Popotman turns to Van Destar, calling him a sloppy summoner, but with decent power. Van Destar boasts, saying of course he's a genius adventurer. But Popotman bursts his bubble, saying that at this rate, he'll never surpass his older brother. Van Destar is shocked and asks how he knows that, but the master just says he knows things. He points out that Van's biggest weakness is his lack of control, which makes his summons slow. Poppetman then smiles and says what he really needs to develop is coordination. To do that, he says he's going to seal all of Van Destar's senses and body movements. From now on, his own summon will have to do everything for him, carrying him on its back, and to make matters worse, he throws them both into the most ant-infested part of the place. The ants screech menacingly, already preparing to attack with everything they've got. Unable to do anything, the summoner is carried into the chaos, hearing a good luck escaping. Finally, he turns to Petra and calls her a cowardly scout, preparing her next training session. Popotman analyzes Petra, saying her ether indicates she should be great, but she's incompetent. He then asks if she knows why her group fell into the anthill in the first place. Angrily, he yells in her face that it was all her fault for not sensing the danger. Popotman continues his scolding, saying that even a bronze-rank scout would have noticed the trap. He explains that what she lacks is instinct and takes her to a pitch-black cave. The place is sinister, and he warns her that inside, she won't be able to see or hear anything. She'll have to rely solely on her instincts to survive in there. Her mission is to find the path to the heart of the cave and retrieve an item he has hidden. And to make things even more complicated, he warns that there are some stray ants wandering around. The ants are extremely sensitive, so any noise could trigger a surprise attack. Petra is on high alert, her eyes wide, ready for whatever comes next. With her training underway, Poppetman finally turns to Nagi, calling him the porter. Nagi then begins to train alone, showing incredible skill with his sword. But the master interrupts him, warning that the boy will actually be fighting him, and so a real battle begins, their swords clashing and sparking. The fight is intense, with their swords clashing relentlessly at an absurd speed. Nagi dodges several blows, but Popotman says his biggest problem is something he does with his eyes, always analyzing everything around him. The master explains that he overthinks his analysis, focusing too much on his opponent's habits and patterns. But Nagi manages to defend himself well, blocking a powerful attack with his sword. Popotman says that this strategy isn't wrong, but dungeons are a different story. Being unpredictable by nature, they require a different approach to fighting. And with that, he lands a surprise blow on Nagi, showing that you can't predict everything. He understands that Nagi is trying to compensate for his lack of talent and physical limitations, but ironically, this very tactic is limiting his true potential. Just then, a bluish power cracks and explodes, revealing the boy's new ability. Popotman says that perhaps all of this comes from the part of him that thinks he'll never be an adventurer. Tired, Nagi recalls the master saying that with talent, he would have easily defended that attack. And he says that Popotman, who talks so much about talent, should know what it's like to have none. With a smile, the master replies that he used to think that way, but he realized something while studying the ether. Popotman begins to explain that in this world, everyone can awaken ether in one of three ways. He shows the talent, equipment, and formless ether types, the three main categories. The talent type is the most common, manifesting as a class inherited from one's ancestors. Popotman explains that as soon as someone receives a class, their growth accelerates absurdly, but Nagi interrupts him, saying he already knows that and that most talents are useless. Popotman then says he wanted to discuss the special cases, precisely like Nagi's. He begins to talk about the equipment type ether, which manifests in tools and weapons. Nagi then completes the thought, saying that even with strong equipment, one lacks the physical power to use it. The master agrees, but warns that there's a very important point most people forget. He explains the fundamental difference between relics and ether-type equipment. Unlike relics with fixed powers, equipment ether grows along with its user. This happens because the equipment itself is the purest form of materialized ether. At this point, Popotman says he probably forgot to mention a small detail about himself. With a smile, he reveals that he is also an equipment-type ether user. His weapon is the Trickster, a fishing rod that can hook absolutely anything. Nagi is shocked to discover that Papatman is also an equipment-type ether user. He wonders how someone without talent can be so strong, thinking it's impossible. Papatman then chuckles and asks if the boy is impressed with him already. He begins to explain that when an equipment-type user understands their own ether and achieves a perfect union with it, truly incredible things can happen. With that, he casts his lure onto the ground, as if he were fishing on land. The artifact, a blue lure, sinks into the ground as if it were water, a very bizarre sight. Then he activates his secret fishing technique, pulling something from within the soil. To everyone's surprise, he fishes out a pink arowana, saying the dungeon is a good fishing spot. With a shout of, "All right!" he prepares to devour the fish he just caught. And without any ceremony, he begins to chew the entire fish right there, in front of Nagi. The boy stands frozen, completely stunned, surrounded by petals of energy floating in the air. Nagi is in a state of total panic, unable to process what's happening. His entire sense of reality was just shattered right in front of him. Now, a pink monster stands there with a gruesome smile, staring him down from inches away. With a bizarre grin, the creature asks if they can begin the next lesson. He reveals a massive, muscular pink body and calls Nagi Sweetie. The scene shifts to the story of an adventurer who met a grim fate in a goblin dungeon. Out of nowhere, a mysterious veteran appeared just in time to save his group. With a single strike, he obliterated one of the monsters, showcasing his raw power. Without breaking a sweat, he wiped out every last goblin, leaving the rookie in absolute shock. The boy honestly admits that the guy's pink skin was terrifying. Papatman seems to have taken a liking to the rookie, but he has a look in his eyes that scares the boy to death. Elsewhere, a giant ant lets out a deafening screech, its eyes glowing with intensity. Nero prepares for battle, clenching her fist with everything she's got. She lunges forward and lands a massive blow, shattering the monster's carapace. However, she screams in pain as the impact of her own strike recoils through her. Looking up, she realizes the situation is impossible against a beast like that. Nero complains that the ant's shells are far too hard for her physical attacks to handle. It's explained that using her special ability drains all of her power at once. Once she's out of energy, the other ants begin to swarm without mercy. Desperate, she screams that she needs a plan to make it out of there alive. Far away, a man with a covered face screams in a mix of panic and frustration. He runs for his life, shouting for a golpero while fleeing from a horde of monsters. His escape leads him to a fork in the road, but one path is blocked. Suddenly, a voice in his head commands him to turn and take the tunnel to the right. The golem obeys, leaping with incredible speed into the indicated path. But the voice snaps at him, yelling that he was supposed to take the other right, calling him an idiot. The golem falls straight into a trap, finding himself completely surrounded by giant ants. The voice in his mind complains that they are now trapped entirely because of his blunder. He panics and tries to deny the situation, but the voice only confirms the danger. Suddenly, a massive explosion erupts, crushing everything with brutal force. The scene shifts to Petra, who appears breathless after an intense struggle. She looks around through the thick smoke, wondering if the monsters have finally left. Petra realizes these ants are hard to detect, because they have perfectly adapted to the darkness. She starts to worry, thinking she never trained for a dungeon this dangerous. The girl freaks out over her lack of strategy and wonders what Nagi would do. She reflects on how Nagi would never give up, no matter how dire the circumstances. He would always find something in his bag to save the day, so she decides to do the same. All she finds is a dowsing wire, a very simple tool. Petra explains that it isn't much, but it's an item compatible with scouts like her. She accepts that while it's a beginner's tool, it is perfect for her current level. The girl realizes she has relied too much on her sight, but a true scout uses their sixth sense. Petra says that in a place like this, opening her eyes only floods her mind with useless information. She concentrates and casts the dowsing wire, focusing all of her power into it. From the tip of the tool, she begins to spread her energy throughout the entire area. With this, she manages to map out the location, revealing the enemy's positions. She notices her range is still limited, and she can't see very far yet. The girl takes a careful step, knowing that precision is now more important than speed. With the wire in hand, she begins to move cautiously through the treacherous terrain. Even if it's slow, she must keep moving forward, taking it one firm step at a time. The scene changes to Nagi collapsing to the ground, laughing from sheer exhaustion. He feels as if every muscle in his body has simply shut down at once. With a weak smile, he asks if this can even be considered a real lesson. But Papatman appears and warns him that in this state, he doesn't usually go easy on people. The masked man says he might even end up killing Nagi by accident during the fight. Instantly, Nagi's eyes turn red, and he draws a sword to defend himself. He prepares a counterattack, manifesting a red energy barrier with his hand. Nagi tries to block the incoming strike, but his sword begins to crack under the overwhelming force. The impact of the blow causes an explosion, sending both of them flying during the fall. But Popotman recovers instantly, appearing behind Nagi with a crazed laugh. He leans in and whispers that he's finally caught the boy. He then gives Nagi's face a disgusting lick, leaving the boy completely paralyzed in shock. The masked man remarks that this is exactly what a true rookie tastes like. Fueled by pure rage, Nagi screams that the bastard is going to pay dearly for that. He quickly grabs an item from his bag to try a surprise attack on the enemy, but Popotman easily dodges and says his movement was too slow. Nagi realizes his attacks aren't working, so he asks Gluttony for help. He throws a mushroom towards the enemy, who opens its mouth to devour it. The small mushroom explodes inside Popotman's mouth, causing a bright flash, but the monster finds it delicious, and a giant explosion erupts around him. Popotman asks if he's questioning the power difference between them. Enraged, Nagi yells and demands he reveal how he did that. With a smirk, Popotman says that he actually has the answer, but he adds that he has no idea, leaving Nagi confused. Popotman explains that training for this kind of power is brutal and has no clear path. He says Nagi limits himself because he thinks he has no talent for being an adventurer. Then, a flashback shows Nagi being surrounded by dark, frightening figures. The masked man reveals he used to think the same way, and now he's going to shatter the boy's belief. With that, he takes an attack stance, like an animal ready to pounce. He yells for Nagi to feel the huge power gap between them. What followed was an endless beating, but for some strange reason, Nagi couldn't stop laughing, even while getting beaten relentlessly by the enemy. He lies on the ground exhausted, but with a huge laugh on his face. Then he realizes Popotman was right about everything he'd said. Deep down, he had always denied it, but he knew he'd given up on being an adventurer. Nagi remembers seeing people start in the same place as him in the past, but they shot ahead, and he just couldn't keep up. Nagi remembers that no matter how hard he tried, he could never catch up to the others. Actually, he corrects himself, saying the feeling was even worse than that. He had to stand by and watch all his companions leave him behind. That's why he couldn't celebrate their progress. He felt inferior. Nagi was laughing because Popotman hit the nail on the head, so meeting him was a stroke of luck, even though the masked man was tough to deal with, yelling at him to get up. Popotman tells him to stop complaining because if you're weak, you have to train twice as hard. And so, under his leadership, Nagi began a brutal training regimen with sparring matches, in addition to real battles facing various dangerous monsters in the dungeon. With this, the rookie invaders began to face their own weaknesses head-on. The scene cuts back to Petra, who is running from a monster at an incredible speed. Far away, Popotman thinks the boy is interesting, a gem that Agnesa found. He wonders if someone like Nagi could ever reach his level, but suddenly, Popotman stops and looks back, sensing something strange. The dungeon has changed, and he says the place feels familiar, with something evil in the air. Nagi asks Popotman what that horrible feeling is that he's sensing. Popotman says the pressure feels like that of a very high-rank dungeon. Suddenly, they find two fallen adventurers who look terrified. Nagi finds it strange, as they're from Guild 404 and wouldn't lose to ants. One of the men trembles in fear, not understanding what just happened. He warns that he's scared because the monster is coming to get them all. Desperate, the adventurer clings to Popotman, begging him to save him. The man screams that the monster is already here, putting Popotman on high alert. A mysterious voice emerges from the shadows and orders them to be eliminated now. Then, a flash of red energy appears and rushes toward the group. Popotman quickly prepares, gripping his weapon tightly to counterattack. The adventurer continues to cling to him, desperately pleading to be saved, but Popotman looks at the attack and realizes it's too late to escape. A swift red slash hits the masked man head-on with full force. Popotman is hit, losing his arm, leaving Nagi horrified by the scene. The impact sends him to the ground, and he drops his weapon, feeling the pain of the blow. A mysterious woman appears and comments that she aimed for the head, but he dodged. She reveals herself fully with an axe and says he's pretty strong, isn't he? It's revealed that her name is Johanna, and she looks at them with a malicious smile. The scene shifts to the headquarters of the White Order, an organization of great power and influence. Inside, the place is a grand sanctuary, with rays of light illuminating the entire hall. A priestess finds her superior and tells her she's been looking for her everywhere. She says everyone was worried about her disappearance, but the other woman apologizes. The older woman explains she's taking care of Johanna's birds, who left for a job. The novice then mentions she heard Johanna went to the ant nest dungeon. With a smile, the superior praises her, saying she's a great example for the apprentices. She says Johanna even cared for sick birds, despite all her duties. For her great talent and heart, she hopes Johanna becomes the next saint. But it's revealed that Johanna was hiding her identity and had begun her plan inside the dungeon. The scene changes to the ant nest, a dark hole with a very sinister energy. Inside, Johanna poses with her axe, showing a confident and dangerous smile. In a flashback, Nagi remembers her name, the priestess who traveled with Guild 404. He realizes the energy around her is the same, wondering if she was the culprit. Back in the present, Nagi asks if Puppetman is okay and looks for something to heal him. Puppetman replies that he's fine, but asks Nagi to listen to what he has to say. He warns that the girl is absurdly strong, making the atmosphere even more tense. Puppetman reveals she cut off his arm before he could even react. Using his technique, the fallen hand on the ground is connected by the line of his fishing rod. With his binding ability, he quickly pulls the limb back into place. He says it's no problem and he just has to stick his arm back on like it's nothing, but inwardly, he admits the patch-up is basic and he won't be able to use his full strength. Puppetman then wonders if he can really face her in such a bad state. Johanna starts laughing, accusing him of pretending to be a priest with that healing. She says she'll show him what real healing is, releasing a green aura. Then, Johanna fires a massive wave of energy towards poor Puppetman. He recognizes the healing energy and is confused, wondering why she would heal him. However, a flash reveals a red, dangerous core in the middle of that healing light. Puppetman finally understands the trap, and his eyes widen as a chill runs down his spine. The energy then explodes violently, showing it was never a real heal. The explosion hits him, but has no effect. He explains it started as a healing spell, but the power shifted before it reached him. He screams that she's insane. Johanna scoffs, saying that a simple white rank shouldn't have been able to dodge her attack. He retorts about her being a bronze rank, but Johanna warns that she won't waste time on someone who's about to die. Puppetman thinks to himself that priests aren't supposed to be good fighters, or at least that's what they say, but he realizes she's not normal, sensing she's very experienced in killing. To understand what's going on in the dungeon, he concludes he needs to fight her, so he uses the tip of his weapon to draw a long line in the sandy ground. Puppetman warns Nagi not to cross that line, no matter what happens next. Nagi worries about his arm, but the masked man tells him to worry about himself. With a sinister smile, he says, "This is a rare learning opportunity to see high rankers in action." He prepares for the fight, feeling that this time he's hooked something truly fierce. Now it's time to pull with all his might, so he spins his body and casts his lure. The small blue sphere hits the ground, creating ripples as if in a lake. And with his secret fishing technique, he summons a gigantic blue marlin for battle. Instead of attacking, the summoned creature turns into a small fish that Puppetman starts to eat. Johanna laughs at the scene, asking if he's having a snack because he doesn't consider her a threat. But suddenly she stops laughing and realizes something strange is happening to him. Out of nowhere, an immense amount of blue energy explodes from Puppetman's body. The aura of power envelops his face, and the bear mask begins to disappear. And so, he reveals his true form, a young, white-haired man with an intimidating spear. Johanna compliments his appearance, saying he should have taken off that ridiculous mask from the start, but he replies that this is the mask, and the bare face was the real one. Without another word, he starts spinning his new spear at high speed, preparing himself. He lunges at her with a leap, warning that she'd better be ready for what's coming. With a serious look, he says he doesn't go easy on anyone who messes with his dungeon raid. She's a little intimidated, but tries to hide it, saying she's sure he's just playing around. Then, Johanna fires a small magical blast, testing her opponent's skills. Puppetman simply ignores the attack and catches her giant axe with his spear. The battle finally begins, with the sound of clashing steel and a swift counterattack. The power of the bluish spear clashes violently with the red energy of the axe. With the force of the impact, Johanna's weapon is thrown far into the air, but she remains unfazed, making her axe spin in the air, controlling it from a distance. The floating weapon starts firing energy blasts, forcing Puppetman to dodge. He complains in his thoughts, thinking that her floating weapon is getting really annoying. With so many attacks, he ends up faltering and is almost hit head-on by the offensive. Johanna then clasps her hands, as if preparing for a sacred prayer. She taunts the young man, saying he's already tired and she hasn't even used her priest talent. With that, she launches several green light spheres in his direction with a smile on her face. The sacred light ability surrounds Puppetman, leaving him with nowhere to escape the attack. The light explodes into several crystals, but he manages to defend himself using his spear. He analyzes the energy, confirming she is indeed a priestess, as he suspected. Puppetman then wonders if the floating axe is the power of the relic she's using, but he decides it doesn't matter, and starts charging his own energy into the spear. With a sending waterfall, he charges forward, and the two powers clash once more. He thinks about the flying axe and the attack disguised as healing, admiring the fluidity of her strikes. With the perfect combination of attacks, He's thrown back without a chance to defend. He realizes she's controlling the space with precision, closing in very quickly. He then finds himself forced to defend against a combination of attacks from all sides. With a serious look, he understands that this won't be an easy fight to win. A gigantic explosion occurs, mixing the power of the two high-level combatants. The shockwave reaches Nagi, who watches everything from behind the protective line. He is completely shocked by the level of power he's witnessing for the first time. Worried, he can only think about Popotman in the middle of all that chaos. He finally understands this is how high-rank adventurers truly fight. Nagi was thinking of helping if he saw an opening, but the fight is too intense. He realizes there's no way for him to join the fray, and lets go of the item he was about to use. But Popotman's voice warns him to keep his eyes open and pay close attention. He says that Nagi will miss it if he blinks, even for a single second. Seeing the little creature on the ground, Nagi understands that his idea of helping was quite arrogant. Popotman moves through the red bombardment, trying to find an opening to attack. He holds his spear tightly, and the clash of blows makes a metallic sound all around. With a quick spin, he deflects another sequence of attacks coming his way. The barrage of power is continuous, surrounding him from all sides with deadly energy. He stays focused on the fight, while Johanna just laughs at the situation, seemingly having fun. From a distance, Nagi blames himself, realizing how arrogant it was to think he could be of any help. The pressure is so intense that Popotman charges forward in an instant. He manages to stop the attacks, showing impressive control. The energy of the fight is so absurd that a few stray bolts escape and almost hit Nagi. He takes a step back, concluding that he's useless here and will only get in the way. That's why he decides he cannot, under any circumstances, cross the line that was drawn. Suddenly, a wave of bluish power explodes, as if a waterfall had formed. In the middle of the water, Popotman extends his hand, showing he's in control of the situation. He realizes she's attacking him non-stop, as if desperate to keep him away. But in doing so, she reveals her weakness, and now he knows exactly how to attack. He activates his Lancer talent, summoning a turtle-shaped creature. With Turtle Shield, he charges forward, breaking through all the attacks coming his way. And right after, he uses Piercing Lunge, a straight and very fast strike. But Johanna manages to dodge at the last second, narrowly escaping the attack. She praises him for guessing that her priest form would be weak in close-quarters combat, but she warns him that this assumption was a mistake, as her feet begin to glow with a greenish energy. He attacks again, but she dodges, and he realizes he's made a huge mistake. Upside down, she uses her priest talent to buff her own physical strength. With her power increased, she advances at a speed he can barely follow, and just like that, she lands a powerful kick that sends him flying with an explosion. Without giving him time to breathe, she prepares another strike with a smile on her face. Johanna lands a solid hit, proving she's also a beast in hand-to-hand combat. He realizes she's a priestess who buffs herself for close-quarters combat. Popotman takes the blow to the face, but he's still impressed by her strength. She follows up with another strike, showing the fight is far from over. Even while taking a beating, he manages to dodge another blow with a swift move. Popotman tells her that boosting her stats won't fix her sloppy fighting style. But suddenly, he feels a strange chill, realizing something is very wrong. A dark aura traps him, and he panics as he realizes his body is completely paralyzed. With a victorious smile, Johanna simply says she's got him right where she wants him. She then gives her weapon the final command, telling the guillotine to finish him off. The axe comes down with full force, causing a massive red explosion on the battlefield. Johanna laughs, admitting that this time, she was genuinely trying to kill him with that attack, but Popotman survives, grumbling that he can barely stand and is aching all over. At least now he understands her methods, and her specialty has finally become clear. He explains that her relic defies gravity, and her healing magic turns into pain. Her blessings become curses, because her true specialty is reversal. She's surprised he figured it out, but asks what difference it makes now that he's finished. While Nagi's team was training, Agnes's squad entered the Queen Ant's dungeon. It's a very difficult mission where they have to face the Queen and her soldiers head-on. That's why the Twilight Wind Guild sent their best forces, all fully prepared. But for some strange reason, Agnesa feels that something isn't right. The raid ends anticlimactically, with them finding nothing but an empty hole in the ground. Van Destar starts laughing, finding a nest without a queen hilarious, and Popotman agrees. Agnesa glares at him, saying he did nothing as usual, but he just makes a lame excuse. Then, she asks the cleric for her opinion, as she feels the boss is missing. The girl agrees that something is wrong, explaining that a boss vanishing like this shouldn't happen. She says the energy trail leads down a tunnel, wondering who would kidnap the queen. Analyzing the cave, the cleric senses a dark and strange energy filling the entire place. She realizes this energy has been here all along, as if it were waiting for them. Suddenly, a dark energy lunges towards them, taking them both by surprise. surprise. The cleric is in shock, instantly recognizing what's happening right in front of her. She yells that it's a message recorded directly into the energy. From the dark energy, a bizarre creature emerges, letting out a wicked and terrifying laugh. She stares at Agnesa and says she knew she would show up right here, but the creature warns that she'll start with the appetizer, leaving Agnesa tense and worried. With that, the monster moves through the cave, its absurd size making everything tremble. The creature shouts that they will see the result of their mistake, and Agnesa warns that it's a trap. Then, the monster launches a powerful poison attack, causing a gigantic explosion of energy. The group protects themselves as best they can behind a barrier, trying to survive the force of the blow. Agnesa asks if everyone is okay, and Popotman replies that it'll take a while to get out of there. At that moment, she realizes the huge mistake she's made, understanding they're in the wrong place. The dungeon that's about to break is the ant nest where Nagi and the others are right now. The scene shifts again, showing Johanna charging her opponent with everything she's got. Her axe clashes multiple times against the enemy's weapon in a rapid exchange of blows. She thinks her opponent is very strong, and that with her ability, it's impossible to even get close. Nagi watches the fight from a distance, seeing Johanna in trouble against the relentless attacks. He realizes Popotman is still injured, and if this keeps up, he won't last much longer. Nagi feels helpless, thinking that if he were stronger, he could cross the line and help. Nearby, Geralt is on the ground, completely defeated and drooling, in a state of shock. Nagi finds him and asks what happened, wanting to know if Johanna did this to him. But Geralt, terrified, warns that a giant ant is coming and that they're all going to die. Elsewhere, Johanna mocks Popotman, saying that if he keeps trembling, it's over for him. Popotman understands that running away won't solve anything and decides he needs to attack with all his might. Since he can't dodge the curse up close, he prepares to attack from a distance. With that, he shouts that he has no choice and throws his weapon with full force. Using his blue strike ability, he unleashes a blast of energy in the shape of a dragon. The attack rushes towards Johanna, who stands still, waiting for the impact as she easily defends. The energy explodes with immense power, creating a shockwave that completely engulfs the villainess. But when the dust settles, she appears with a smile and says she already warned him. She says that figuring out her specialty changes nothing, as she's his perfect counter. He retrieves his spear, disagreeing with a simple no and a look of sheer determination. Popotman retorts that it changes everything, because he's found the problem and now just needs the solution. He tells Nagi to pay close attention, as this is a great learning opportunity. He explains that the secret is knowing how to deal with an opponent who can't be beaten by brute force. With a smile on his face, he says, this is the exact moment things get serious. He gets into a fighting stance, announcing that the real fight is about to begin. Shouting, he charges straight at her, unleashing an impressive aura of power. His eyes glow with a blue light as he moves quickly to attack Johanna. He readies his spear, focusing all his energy for a final, decisive blow. But she just laughs at him, saying she's disappointed because she could have reversed the blessing from the very beginning. Suddenly, the blessing turns into a curse, and a wave of dark power hits him hard. It's explained that her ability, Reversal, inverts buffs when activated by a curse. He knows he only has one chance. At the exact moment, his buff becomes a debuff. His weapon has a special trait that allows him to see energy fish no one else can. His secret fishing technique is unpredictable, making it hard to hit a specific target, but with the Marlin harpoon, he can aim and catch exactly what he needs to win. It's revealed that Popotman has caught a purple tang, a fish that grants him the talent of a mage. He says that's exactly what he needs, then eats the fish with a fierce expression. Johanna is in shock, as it's explained that the blue marlin had increased his physical stats. With it, his strength, dexterity, and agility had greatly increased, making his body very strong. But upon switching to the mage talent, his stats dropped, and only his intelligence went up. However, thanks to her reversal, the drop in stats was inverted again, boosting everything absurdly. Now, in his new strength mage form, he charges at her with overwhelming power. He yells that this is the reversal of the reversal, leaving Johanna horrified by his strategy. Angered, Johanna tries to use her ability one more time to turn the tables again. Nagi, watching it all, realizes that Popotman managed to turn her own ability against her. He's impressed, understanding that Popotman has incredible instincts and tactics. Suddenly, the witch's mark glows intensely, signaling that something bad is about to happen. At that moment, Geralt, who was still down, begins to be suffocated by a strange, dark energy. He lets out a crazed laugh, now covered in a red aura that frightens Nagi. Nagi recognizes it instantly and says it's the same cursed energy he felt from Johanna. Nagi shouts desperately, asking what Geralt thinks he's doing, but Geralt just tells him to shut up, slamming his hand into the ground. Nagi despairs on the sand, shouting for him to live, and throws his sword. The weapon flies quickly through the air, spinning at high speed toward the danger. He then manages to defend against the blow, yelling that there's no way he's going to die. His sword scrapes against the other, the friction of the blades creating a shower of sparks. With a cry, he tries to counter the attack, but ends up getting cut by his opponent. He falls to the ground, defeated, while the possessed Geralt lets out a sinister laugh. Then, the giant begins to drag his sword, preparing to attack again. He announces that Miss Johanna can count on him, sounding like a loyal servant. With that, he spins his weapon at incredible speed, creating a circular attack. Nagi tries to charge at Johanna, but Geralt's attack heads toward Popotman. Popotman doesn't back down, twisting his body to withstand the impact of the blow. The blade strikes his arm squarely, making a loud cutting sound, but he doesn't even flinch and says it was nothing, showing off the power of his mage talent. He grips his staff tightly, preparing to unleash his full power. With a swift movement, he raises the weapon, making the earth tremble around him. The staff then turns red, charged with a super destructive magical energy. With that, he charges straight at Johanna, ready to end the fight. He yells right in her face, declaring with conviction that the game is over for her. Then, he slams the ground with a magic smash, causing a gigantic explosion.